Hello and welcome to American Wasp. I'm your host, Dieter McBusiness, America's favorite white Anglo-Saxon Protestant gone left coastal. Today, we are going to be weighing in on the David Pakman versus the socialist left drama by way of his interview with another neoliberal, Gavin Newsom. Over the course of that reaction, you'll probably come to realize that neither of these two people or their ilk should be representing the progressive left for the future because they are not really progressives. They are capitalists. And then after that, we're going to watch the Pod Save America guys on some 2028 candidates, and we'll see how that goes. I'm not really have any idea what that content's going to be like. So, with no further ado, let's get into one of the great pussies of the left, David Pakman.
The right plays on fear, identifies villains more quickly and more effectively than the left. If you go to Bernie and to Tucker Carlson, they will give you a similar diagnosis up front. We need better models of masculinity. And where I think the left has sort of failed is the narrative of toxic masculinity is bad as a primary.
I don't know what the fuck this guy's gonna tell anybody about masculinity worth listening to. I don't think this motherfucker's won anything in his life other than an argument, if that.
Message. I think it pushes people away.
This is Gavin Newsom.
And this is David Pakman.
We got to just start right there, Mr. Argentina.
Yes.
Born
Yep.
in Argentina.
Yeah.
I mean, have you recovered? You good? Is you all right?
Second place is pretty good.
No, it's
but
not.
you always want to be first.
Oh God, you sound like a
it
politician.
is completely devastating
Thank
when
you.
they lose that. That's the truth. And honestly, it's been really tough. There's been this 3-week campaign of there's no worse country than Argentina now. Argentina is the most racist. Argentina is both Nazi and in bed with Bibi. Like it's anything that can be thrown at it, and that part is really a bummer because Argentina does not get attention for anything globally usually, and it's like Milei is friends with Trump, and Argentinians are horrible people. So
you had a horrible week.
It was
you had to suffer through all of that.
Yeah.
And sit there and watch Messi as he's just absorbing and sobbing.
At least we didn't lose to England, is the takeaway.
Is that it?
Well, historically, because that's a big matchup
that-
and rivalry. But
Are you
what can
still
do?
angry with them putting out those, just the flags and everything?
I am not into how politicized it was. And I think it was also a little hypocritical, like as an example, just to point out one hypocrisy. We're against colonizers. And we're against colonizers and we're rooting for Spain against Argentina, the colonizer of Argentina.
Well, see,
like that
this
doesn't
is-
make a lot of sense.
Wow, so you really are, this is nature nurture.
Yeah.
You're defending your home country back in the day. I respect that, man.
But also I defended that the United States would have been much better off winning without Trump's intervention if they could have done
come
it.
on, what a-
Because it just devalues it.
But you thought it was, you liked seeing Trump there at the celebration, right? Wasn't it nice to see that? Our president didn't make you proud?
I like that
being
the
American?
Spanish, what I loved about the Spanish players is they didn't give whatever about Trump being there, and they were doing their celebration, and they were looking at him like, who's this guy? What's he doing here? And then they cropped him out of the celebration pictures, which is beautiful.
I mean,
It's
even
beautiful.
FIFA cropped him out, not
FIFA
just
cropped him out.
which is, geez, I mean, that was,
Whatever.
I mean, and
I don't care about the
he's 10
World
years old.
Cup.
It's the sweetest. I can only, if he felt this way, I can't even imagine how Argentine fans felt. But I mean, he started sobbing after they lost, and his sisters were making fun of her, and then everyone.
Knows of this show, it made zero. And I don't mean like it didn't make a lot of money. It made there was just no revenue. And so I think like in some sense, getting from $0 to $1 is the spark where it's like, okay, it can make $1. Can this be something? And so my was in the immediate pre-Obama era. So it was the Iraq War. It was, and my friend, and I don't mean like it didn't make a lot of and then when I hired my first real employee and was able to say, okay, now this is now a business, I think that was probably the beginning of thinking there might be something to this. And I was in grad school at the time doing an MBA, and my friends were becoming financial advisors and bankers.
Did you hear that? He was in grad school getting his MBA. He got his MBA, guys. What does that tell you? He's a capitalist.
Going into private equity, which seemed very cushy and lucrative in the immediate, but the long term of that just didn't appeal to me. So I said, I'll give myself a year to really see if this can become
And
something.
was it always? I mean, was it political?
That's bullshit, by the way. If you do digging on David Beckham, you realize he's always been obsessed with being on camera. He's a little bit narcissistic. I don't know if he's got MPD, but he's definitely got some narcissistic tendencies.
Political show from the outset.
Yes.
And it was commenting about local city councils.
It was
and
always
planning
national.
commission. Always national. Interesting. Take the picture 21 years ago. What were the big issues? You remember?
Well, 21 years ago, it was in the immediate pre-Obama era. So it was the Iraq War. It was, what is it going to look like when George W. Bush is done with his second term?
Mm-hmm.
What is the direction Republicans are going to go? This was pre-Tea Party. I mean, it's like almost ancient history to people who are now 25 and voted for the first
Same time, it has
ago.
a lot of echoes of today, right? On the other side, not the Tea Party, but DSA for the Democrats,
Yes.
Democrats in the wilderness. What happens at the second term of
Oh,
Trump?
boy. We're going right into
Obama.
it.
I mean,
I did a commentary that's on my show today, which is making this exact analogy, which is there was a time before Trump in the Tea Party era where the establishment Republican Party kind of said, these people are never going to influence the party. They're never going to guide the direction. And the Tea Party really led to MAGA and to Trumpism.
Yeah.
And I've been critical of the kind of what I call do nothing centrism, which is like, let's find a couple things on the fringes to say we will do and end up doing nothing. I don't think that's good for the Democratic Party.
Right.
But also what I'm seeing, I was just looking at the DSA platform, which it has moral motivations that I respect, but a lot of completely unrealistic stuff that if it becomes litmus test worthy is going to be a real problem for Democrats. And so I don't know when the right time is to have that conversation. I tend to think it's as soon as you realize something's up, it's a good time to do it without saying, well, if we talk about it now, how will it affect the midterms? I think now is when it has to be talked about. I think social democracy is the path forward, which is a sort of Northern European model.
So that's not true.
I'm going to get back to the
That's
DSA.
not true. It's not social democracy. It's socialism.
It's interesting, and we could talk some about those litmus test issues because I think they're important to illuminate because not everybody is familiar
Right.
with some of those platform issues as it relates to private prisons, a number of issues that do deserve a little bit more attention beyond the tonality of sort of this anti-establishment and this desire to see more aggressive, clear leadership, et cetera. But let's jump into your book because you've been writing books for some time now. You've been at this, and I think I wanted to paint a picture. You've been also at this art form of sorts for 21 years because so you don't come to this issue that you bring and highlight in the book from a perspective as an outsider. I mean, you've lived and breathed this in a pretty profound bottom-up way. You've been at this as well, writing books for some time. You wrote a book in 2025 about the right wing and the echo chamber. You've written a lot of children's books, which is interesting. You mentioned your child's Paw Patrol affinity, which I respect, but you've also written a number of children's books. But this one, Pay Attention, How the Algorithms and the Media Wars Are Suppressing Truth and Rewiring Our Brain, is your latest work. It's available in September. So I love that we've had a chance to talk about the book before it's even out there. And full disclosure, read it, love it. And I really want to dive deep into it because we've talked so much, all of us, that we collectively talk about this issue and around this issue. We understand aspects of it, tenets of it, trend lines of it, but not, I think, how pervasive and profound the issue is around algorithms, around what media is all about. And so let's talk a little bit about this book and start with the obvious. And that is you start in the prologue about this arms race. And you're the first to acknowledge you're participating in this arms race.
Right.
And so you, sir, David, are you not the problem?
Well, listen, I think everybody is in a sense contributing to this. And also, I think the best thing we can do is identify the systems that are at play and then figure out what are our choices. One choice is we just kind of abandon it. If we abandon it, we cede ground to those with terrible ideas to completely dominate. I don't think that's a good idea. The second option is we figure out how to play the game while not kind of losing our soul to deception, lies, and misinformation. That's where I kind of tend to land, which is we could ignore these platforms and algorithms, but then the worst people just take them over.
Right.
And I don't think that that makes sense if we understand that these algorithms are determining elections to a great degree. The elections determine who gets power, who has power determines policy. So when I talk to people who go, yeah, I spend a lot of time on social media, but I'm not into politics, I don't vote, I talk to them about what do you care about? Almost always they will list issues, things affecting them that relate to who is in power. And then we can explain, well, you should be engaged in that because the fact that you don't care about politics, you're just struggling to make a living, that's housing, affordability, groceries, energy prices, and jobs. All of that stuff is determined by municipal, state, and federal elections and who you vote for. And then it sort of starts to click. Once we get there, it's, okay, why are you hearing about what you're hearing about and someone else is hearing about something totally different? It's these algorithms, it's these platforms.
And so the big why now? Why this book? I mean, it's in some ways what you just stated is a partial response, but why the big call out? I mean, pay attention. It's an expressive frame. Wake up, maybe another frame.
It's two things. It's one, at this point, the elections more than ever being affected by these platforms. And 2028, probably more than any before that, is going to be highly determined by the narratives that these algorithms determine are the most emotionally salient and put in front of people. That's number one. And number two, because of the AI aspect of it. The whole last part of the book is about how AI will change this. The technology is essentially there to create synthetic influencers. I have to sit in front of a camera, and if I want to do an hour of content, I've got to record an hour of video. With technology, you can dial up 1,000 of me. Yep. Some might be male, some might be female, different identities, whatever will appeal most directly to people, and spin them up with nothing other than compute power and 1,000x what I'm doing, tailored to the algorithms of people. It's 60-70% of the way there as we're recording this. Very, very dangerous.
And you've run your own experience. We'll get to that. And you write about it in the book. Yep. But the introduction begins with AI in some respects. And it's, that sort of iconic image of Donald Trump with the walker. And you make the point that he did this right after he went after states like California, California being the first state in the country to go after large language model, frontier models, and do transparency legislation as it relates to regulating AI. He didn't like that. David Sachs, his AI czar, didn't like that. They tried to preempt the state of California and stop other states. All the while, we saw a viral video of Donald Trump in a walker.
That's right. And the point I make in the book is that by the time it was determined that this image of Trump with the walker isn't real, it kind of didn't matter because it accomplished a bunch of different things for different people. Not all positive or negative for Donald Trump. But the point was, and it kind of returns at the end of the book when we talk about the coming AI flood, what's going to matter is the emotional reaction that this stuff triggers in people. The truth of it is almost irrelevant. And I even talk about talking with creators who have published accidentally, as far as I know, AI stuff. And I've said to them, listen, you know that actually wasn't real. Like, I know it was an honest mistake. That wasn't real. And they go, yeah, but it worked. It got clicks. It got views. And whether I agree with the message or not, I think that is dangerous.
And that goes to the beginning of the book. I mean, you open at chapter 1, it's about attention. I mean, period, full stop.
Yeah. There's the idea, I think a lot of people have, that the likes and how much time you spend on stuff on these platforms will naturally surface what's true and what's right. And that is not the way these platforms are designed. And sometimes I think when we attribute political bias to, like, people want to talk about what are Mark Zuckerberg's personal politics, for example. Interesting question. That's not really what determines what does well on Facebook. What does well on Facebook is what starts to spread quickly. And you can think about, I mean, forget about truth for a second, just to think about vaccines, the COVID vaccine, for example. There's two competing claims. One is these vaccines are killing millions of people and the government has covered it up. That's claim number one. Claim number two is, hey, these vaccines are really safe, not as effective at preventing the spread of COVID as we had hoped, pretty good at keeping you out of the hospital. Or which one, forget about what's true, which one is going to get grandma and a college student and whoever else to like it, comment, and share it? Yeah. Of course, it's the emotionally salient one. Yeah. That's what these platforms are optimized for.
So that goes to this, you know, and you then, as the book goes on in the next chapter, you talk about, you know, we used to have editors. We used to be able to actually sort of, we would fix that by making sure we fix to some North Star of truth. So we can build trust. Now, no longer that's the case.
Right. There are a lot of really interesting books I read in writing this, including, for example, about the New York Times investigation into Harvey Weinstein. And one of the things that comes up, or Ronan Farrow's book about the same topic, a lot of these investigative journalism books, and they all tell stories of editors and executives and all of these layers that have different incentives to slow down a lot of these investigations. And then you find out there's personal stuff at play and there's financial incentives, all these different things. That's a problem with that legacy system. One of the great things about the digital platforms is you kind of get around that or you eliminate that. The other problem with it is that with no fact checking and with no layers of let's make sure we feel good about this, stuff will go ultra viral simply because it's emotionally salient. So I don't tell this, the book is not about bad legacy media. There's pros and cons to these systems. The democratization of the news and politics space has been phenomenal. On the other hand, we also have this problem of truth versus virality to contend with.
And I mean, it's interesting. You frame, and I think it's important. We talk about censorship. It's been talked about. Obviously, Trump talked ad nauseum about censorship. But your issue is, and I think you just hit on it, is abundance. Just overwhelming. I mean, just the narratives coming from every single direction, how you suss out that truth from trust.
That's right. And not only that, not everybody is given all of the same material from which they can then say, here's the side I come down on.
Right.
Based on your interests and online behavior, you and I and everybody else can have a completely different sense of what's going on out in the world. A great example is with the Trump medical stuff that was, when he went for his third physical in 13 months, there were two completely competing narratives. There was one side of the space that was saying the disclosures have never been fulsome and complete. There are inconsistencies here. We don't believe the height and weight that's on these documents. There's stuff missing. He talked about an MRI for 2 months. It turns out it was a CAT scan. That's one side. There are millions of people who vote who were not even exposed to that. It wasn't that they said, oh, I don't believe that or I don't like that. Their algorithms don't even show them that content. They don't even get the opportunity to say, do I want to examine this critically? How do you fix that? That's a major problem.
And you make that point in the book that the algorithm then becomes the boss.
That's right.
And I mean, I mean, to me, there's nothing, it explains so many things in so many ways of our interactions we have, and, fill in the blank with, Uncle Joe or something at the Thanksgiving dinner table. And you're like, what the hell's happened to Uncle Joe?
Yep.
And in many respects, it's completely understandable what's happened to him.
Yeah.
He's sincere about his beliefs because he doesn't see
the
other side. And by the way, maybe we don't. You don't.
So this is where everyone stops short and says, oh, they just operate under the assumption that these are fully formed human beings with adult minds. And they're not. That's the problem. You say, oh, they don't know any better. That's how you talk about a child. That's how you talk about a fucking child. And that's what MAGA trash are, and conservatives in general are. Overgrown children who refuse to face the fact that they are wrong about pretty much everything.
No, I advise my audience, if you want to still be informed and still sort of participate in the space of online news and politics, but you want to kind of take control back a little bit, one of the things you can do is seek out audio podcasts, or they might be video as well, but long form podcasts that you have identified as these are good faith people trying to explore what is really true. Podcasts are not really in this algorithmic space yet. People mostly find podcasts not because of swiping and how long and where they're looking and that sort of thing. They're finding them through interpersonal recommendations, hearing about them on other podcasts, et cetera. So I still think long-form podcasts are one of the best spots to kind of exit.
I mean, most of the podcasts you find through viral clips that are built in this very frame that we're talking about.
It's absolutely true. It's absolutely true. The other thing that I think is good is after you've come to identify some of these mechanisms, you can have a sort of self-check thing where you say, okay, I'm seeing a lot of content that is telling me X. Is that really all there is to this? So being aware of the fact that this is taking place can be a really good kind of inoculation against it. And then you can go and say, hey, let's look at some other ideas about this. There was a point, to go back to the COVID vaccine stuff, where your algorithm would basically take you to anti-Fauci stuff, he's a criminal. Then it takes you to some long-form podcasters who would invite, sometimes they were medical doctors, sometimes they had PhDs, but they were sort of presented as if they were experts in medicine. And you would go down this very dark path. At some point, you could have said, if you had been armed with the knowledge that you're being taken down this garden path, I'm going to now go back and say, let's look at some randomized controlled trials. Let's look at what the people at actual medical institutions are saying. So the point is, knowing that you are pushed further and further is a really good starting point to say, I'm going to go and seek out something else. A lot of times this is really innocent. I tell the story in the book of, for example, it could be people looking for workout content or parenting advice. These are like two, you think parenting advice, workout content. These are radioactive spaces. Mom groups on Facebook where you go and say, hey, I'm looking for some toys that are whatever. And next thing you know, you're being fed stuff about alternative parenting techniques. Do you know what they're teaching your kids in school? By the way, did you know public schools require vaccinations? It takes you through a dark path. You just want a toy recommendations.
Yeah.
This can happen within weeks to people.
I mean, it could happen. I mean, it happened. This is the origin story of this podcast in so many respects. I mean, during COVID, son's on his, he wasn't on any devices that I was aware of outside his advice that came from school, which allowed him to access YouTube. And he's checking on fitness and he's checking on, some of the things that, a lot of these young boys are into. And all of a sudden he's talking to me about Andrew Tate.
Right.
Rogan was a passing phase of sorts. It was more Charlie Kirk. And then different conversations to your point. And it was his entire friend group. I mean, and I don't care. There was an experiment I read the other day where they provided tablets for boys around the globe. And it was, I think, within 22 minutes, they all had formulated the same construct in terms of the algorithms that found them, that sought them out. You're not searching for information. They're seeking you out and targeting you at a level. So that's, I mean, how, and this is the challenge. And you write about, you're at a confessional chapter in there about the machine, it being inside the machine. So sort of work us through that. What was your own confession in this context?
Well,
and how do we start to work ourselves out of this?
I mean, there's no way. Listen, anybody who makes content is not doing it for it to be seen by as few people as possible.
That's the challenge.
You're making it for
lousy incentives here.
Those are the incentive structures. And so what I try to be aware of is I'm not going to deliberately choose stuff that will bomb and that nobody's interested in. I mean, it seems counterproductive. But the way I kind of see it is I'm going to package the content as best as my brain will let me figure out how to maximize eyeballs while being honest, so that then I can also give people the conversation with the PhD nutritionist I had on last week who explains the truth about the Maha stuff and the food dyes and GMO. And so I'm sort of using the techniques to buy myself the bandwidth for the audience to then also accept the stuff that's less likely to go gigaviral, but is valuable. And I think it's important. So it's sort of it's a negotiation with yourself in a sense that you're having.
Right.
I could package the stuff in the most boring way possible and never build an audience. Might it feel good? Maybe on some level, but then I've built no capital that I can then spend on important ideas that I want to put in front of my audience, if that makes sense. So I think it's a negotiation every creator has. And I talk in the book about some who go too far and they've got titles like Trump taken out on a stretcher. And then you watch the video and it's like, Trump was not taken out on a stretcher. That's very far beyond the pale. But editorializing about what I see as Caroline Leavitt's failings as a press secretary and making that as engaging as possible, I think that's you have to play that game. And again, in the audio podcast, there's none of that stuff. It's 70 minutes of me talking. There's none of this editorialized titles or anything because you don't need it.
Mm-hmm. And you talk about colors as well. It was interesting. Just, I mean, I never looked at the shades in the context of how that's able to move the needle as well.
Yeah, it's intuitively, the specifics change over time, but what we figured out intuitively, and most of these algorithms are black boxes, so you never get hard data about it. Intuitively, more sort of saturated colors and bright colors.
Performing, it's changing us.
Yeah.
In every way, shape, or form. Our physiological changes, not just what we say, it's how we say it, where we say it.
I hear from a lot of congressional and Senate staffers who want to figure out, how do I make my principles, content, speeches, etc., more interesting for them to get covered. And there's 100 senators and 435 in the House. They're all competing for attention. They all kind of want to be in that top 5% of who is brought on shows to comment on stuff. And I don't necessarily have the answers for them. It's not my area of expertise, but they understand that there's more than just what they are saying. It's the packaging, it's the appearance, it's the emotionality and the tone. So this goes way beyond content creators and streamers.
And what do you make of that? I mean, obviously, we can, get some bunch of Kennedy memorabilia up here. My favorite with his hand on at the desk, like exacerbated. But the modern era of television as it relates to how debates were won and how people began to perform a little bit. And we've seen the performance changes as it relates to even city council meetings.
Yes.
When they're televised and when they're not.
Yeah.
And how quite literally changes people. It changes the tone and tenor. It changes what people say, how they say it, and how long they say it, whether or not they look engaged or not engaged. What do you make of that in the context of what this is doing to all of us, to me, to you, to all of us listening?
Everybody who is on these platforms is affected by this. Even if you say, I'm not a creator, I'm not a streamer, I'm not an elected official. If you are participating in comment threads, if you're posting vacation pictures, if you're doing the thing at the restaurant where you take pictures of your food, and then everybody is sort of staging some version of their life and then gauging the reaction that it gets. So it's affecting everybody. And there are people who aren't professional content creators who just get bummed out when teenagers who post stuff and their friends don't like it or they get attacked.
This is when really mediocre intellectuals get together and try to sound smart. That's what this conversation is.
All of this stuff. So everybody's in this space if you're on the platform.
Yeah, but what happened? But aren't we all celebrating the authentic? Isn't that what we're all after?
So that's a really interesting word, because you kind of, if you're in this 24/7 like a lot of people are, you start to lose touch with what is the authentic self.
Right.
And at this point, you may be evaluating the.
That's not true. If you're educated, you meditate, you diversify your life experience, you're making sure you're exposing yourself constantly to people that are different from you. No, you can transcend the ignorance of your media context. That's ridiculous. It's, again, here we are, intellectual weakness from the moderate left.
prior performance and tweaking that. And I don't know what that does to interpersonal relationships. I mean, I
Thank
think
you, boss.
one of the things that is definitely true is 98% of my interactions online with people are very negative.
Sure
and
did,
100,
98%.
98%. And 100% of my in-person
There's a great documentary called The Best of Enemies about a debate versus Bill Buckley and Gore Vidal that you should check out. Amazing stuff. Like, it should be required reading in high schools. It's so good.
interactions with people are positive or neutral. And so the disinhibiting nature of these interpersonal means
Yep.
where you see people, you kind of think you know them, you're willing to say, sometimes I'll get emails from people who say horrible, horrible things to me. And I rarely write back, but sometimes I'll just as a test, I'll go, do you think you would say this to me if we met in person? And oftentimes it completely deflates the anger and people go, after a day, I was really upset with what you said. The truth is, I know you're just saying what you believe. I disagree with it. We'd probably have a good conversation in person, which is a really interesting switch.
I just look.
But the ugliness that comes from digital media, social media, and people kind of laying out there how they really feel, and it's uncomfortable, right? It's ugly. People get enraged and just spew out their honest opinions. And that's what I think is the good side. It sucks that America is so ugly, but how the hell else are you going to fix a problem if you don't assess it properly, if you can't see the problem for the way it is? So I think that the vitriolic quality of social media is in a very dark way a good thing, because it shows you how dark this country is and how far we have to go to make it right. So I know it's uncomfortable, but wouldn't you rather have a racist be loud and proud with their racism so you can see them coming, as opposed to someone who acts like your friend and is secretly a racist? Like, that's just one example of many.
Looking back, I'm curious, as you said, do you remember the first thing that just blew up? First, I mean, something that you said or did, or how you said it, how you did it, how you thumbed it, whatever it might have been, that you're like, whoa, this thing, like, what do you remember? What was it?
I do.
question.
There was a story where a woman did a test. A black woman was not getting job interviews. And she did a test where she started submitting her resume with what you would call a white sounding name instead of what would be considered a black sounding name. Same exact resume. And she suddenly got a ton of callbacks. And I thought it was interesting. I didn't think that that story would perform well, but I thought that it was fascinating as a social commentary. And so I talked about it, and it just went absolutely crazy. And it did a couple things. Number one, it showed me the power of some of these platforms as they grew, that in overnight they could generate tens of millions of views, which is crazy. But number two, it also showed me there was something very emotionally salient about that individual's experience, the story of one particular woman rather than a large group of people. That particular woman's story really resonated with people and maybe got them thinking about their own experiences. And it kind of surprised me how well it did.
And the flip side of that, things that just don't work. I mean, you talked about the complexity, nuance, seeing both sides, storytelling, policy versus emotion. I mean, what are the things that continue to just hit your head and just say, I do not understand why this is not breaking through, whatever this may be?
Not understand is interesting. When I do long form discussions with economists, for example, I'm doing one next week on wealth taxes, and we'll talk about the proposal here, and then the federal one that you talked about, what Europe has done, where it's worked, where it hasn't. If we really want to be serious about collecting more money from the wealthiest, this is like the most important conversation that we'd be having.
Thank you.
It's not going to do that well on YouTube. The clips on TikTok are probably not going to do that
pessimistic.
well. I think
you haven't even done it yet.
No, but my long form audience will like it. So this is the sort of thing where people will take the time to email me and say, that was a really great discussion. Now I understand why wealth taxes will or won't work, or how they need to be structured. It doesn't have it hits you emotional salience of Donald Trump being cropped out of the World Cup picture, right? It doesn't have that. It's 30, 40 minutes with an economist on dense stuff. I wish that did better. I wish it did better. It's extraordinarily important.
The right wing tends to do better in this medium. You write about Rush Limbaugh. I had my second guest on this podcast when I launched it, was Michael Savage, who was competing with Limbaugh back in the day. He was the guy who created the frame Language, Borders, and Culture. Was unbelievably effective in that frame and built a huge audience and still has a career that continues to this day.
And you platform.
They're more naturally successful in this space. You write about that. Why?
Two parts to it. One, the right plays on fear, identifies villains more quickly and more effectively than the left.
Why?
That's number one.
Why though? Why?
Because they treat politics like Mao Zedong defined politics. War without casualties. War is politics with casualties. Politics is war without casualties. Think. Okay? Think. We are at war. When you get people to that framework, everything becomes simpler. Everything becomes more straightforward. There is no, what are we going to do about the Trump trash? We're at war. We're going to isolate them. We're going to radiate them. We're going to mitigate them from affecting our society, because there is nothing good that comes from them influencing our society in any way, shape, or form. That's the war. and it's going to take 40 years to win. And again, here we are. No one's talking like this. Chat, let me know. Have you guys heard any leftists calling for the rhetoric of war here? That's what I want to know. Please, there's only so much content I can watch.
Well, I mean, this gets into deeper stuff. There are some studies that show that the sort of brain realities of the right are more reactive to fear and disgust than the left. It gets into deeper stuff, but one thing is they identify scapegoats and villains really quickly. Some of their arguments are just better in these platforms. Like, to go to some other examples that I talk about in the book. If I just go, listen, it's your money. Taxes are theft, and we need tax relief. That's a really tidy and efficient argument, right? And if I come in as the guy on the left, I don't go, no, taxes are awesome and raise them as high as possible. I have to go, listen, if you want to live in a society with basic infrastructure, the only way to do it is through the collection of taxes by the government. Is it sort of coercive? Well, in a sense, but which one of those is going to do better? Of course, they're stealing your money. It's yours. You should get to keep it. That's structural to their argument. On abortion, there's a similar analogy. Murdering babies is bad. Abortion's murder. That's it. We're not doing it. And we on the left, at least I've never met anyone who goes, abortion's awesome. Let's look to increase the number of abortions. We say there's a lot of competing factors here, and we have to talk about bodily autonomy. And it's not going to translate as it never.
I'll give this. Thank you, Latina Mufune. I'll give this some special love because it's well written. When liberalism repeatedly has failed to protect individual rights and then repeated resurgence of fascism, it would be wise to learn the lessons of history has to offer us and move left.
Translated as well to the rage of AM radio, and it doesn't work as well in the algorithms. It's structural. Now, I don't think it's inevitable that the left has to lose on it. We have to rethink the entry point into a lot of these issues. For example, if you work, of course you should be able to afford a dignified life in the place where you are working, not 70 miles away where it's cheaper. That has a little more emotional salience. And then we can back in, like, what policies are we talking about, housing and wages, et cetera. It's for people who are better on the language stuff than me to kind of figure out, but I don't think it's a lost cause. I just don't think we're winning with it right now.
I mean, do you sense that, Bernie Sanders has been effective? I mean, just calling out the villain. I mean, is that, being able to just sort of distill the essence of it's us versus them. It's not left and right. It's, what Tariq, others are saying. It's the top versus the bottom, people on top, the system's rigged.
Yes,
does that have the emotional salience that actually can compete in that space?
I think it does. What we're kind of getting into now is the populist rhetoric. And the thing I talk about populist rhetoric is that it's not a definitive set of policy proposals. And the danger with the populist rhetoric is that if you go to Bernie and to Tucker Carlson, they will give you a similar diagnosis up front, which is there are these empowered elites that are in it for themselves. Like, you'll get a pretty similar analysis.
Yeah.
You then go to what are the solutions, and Tucker's solutions are pretty ugly in a lot of ways, whereas of course Bernie's are ones that I would agree with more. I think the risk of adopting the populist rhetoric, which Trump has also adopted, is that then the solution may be one that's actually completely antithetical to the policy and values that we support. But on the rhetoric, I think Bernie's been very good.
It's interesting, just the issue of selling fear and anxiety, issues like crime and immigration, and then being able to get away with selling common indifference on things like climate change and the erosion of our hard-earned national rights is, to me, at the core of this dialectic and the challenges we're having as a party.
Yes.
And their ability to shapeshift, their ability to control the narrative, their ability to communicate with taking advantage of so many things you highlight in the book, or illuminating the book as it relates to the algorithms, but also just this machine they built, and not just in one platform, across the spectrum of platforms. But you talked about, Tucker, in the context of these platforms that are out there, and people and personalities in these platforms that are asserting themselves with this notion of independence, and you challenge that a little bit.
Yes.
That no one is truly independent in this space.
Yeah, there's obvious ways and there's less obvious ways. First of all, a lot of times when people talk about independent, they either mean I don't have advertisers controlling me or I don't have editors controlling me. Okay, even if you don't have direct advertisers, if you're monetizing your content through YouTube, Facebook, TikTok, and other built-in monetization platforms, you're still influenced to create content that won't violate those monetization rules so that you don't make money. So that's still there. But there's a lot of other ways that people are not truly independent. For example, wanting access to people in power. And this is what I think has been very interesting about Fox News over the last few months, where they are starting, just 2 days ago, when we learned about more troops tragically killed in the Iran war, Fox News didn't really sugarcoat it. They even played a clip of Trump saying months ago, this is going to be 2 to 3 weeks and nobody's going to die. And then they've got this. I don't think it's out of a desire to kind of plant a flag and say, we now oppose Trump. But I think it's hedging because they don't know what comes next. They don't know what's going to happen in November. They don't know if this president is going to be the lamest of lame ducks for 2 years and we'll see approval ratings in the 20s. So it's about preservation. We also want access and to stay in good graces with the Republican Party and whoever replaces Trump. And so, is that really independence? I would argue that it's not.
And how are you able to balance that in your own? What's your sort of situational awareness about your own capacity to maintain that independence? You've got advertisers, you've got an audience, you have the same desire to have access, to get the right guests, and to be, how do you work through all that?
The first thing is I try to never do anything that is against my kind of existing framework of values. So if I go and interview someone somewhere, I want to make sure that I'm not interviewing someone in whatever way I would normally do it because of somebody who has said, hey, come to our convention or go to this thing or go to that thing. I'm always going to only be upfront with my audience about here's someone whose values and policies I support, here's someone who I don't, and I'm not going to let any kind of financial relationship come in between that. I don't talk to anybody from any of my advertisers. I never have conversations with them. We've luckily never had an advertiser that got word to me, hey, they didn't really like how you, fortunately it's never happened, but I have no conversations with advertisers.
Right.
And if they said something like that, I would say, well, that's not how we do the show. The platforms are the platforms. There's no doubt that there's content I could do that would get me demonetized or even kicked off of the platforms if it were extreme enough. Those aren't really
the book, talking a little bit more about AI. You begin with that Walker video and just around truth and trust in relationship to artificial intelligence. But you commented earlier about 60 to 7% of their in terms of these avatars, people using your voice, you using your own voice, turning it over. And so you ran your own experiment.
Yes.
And it that we need to quote unquote pay attention to, but particularly for young men and boys. I mean, is that an area of focus for you?
It is, absolutely. And I've talked now
All
for
right,
years.
so this is when it's going to get good. David Pakman is about to lecture us about masculinity. What the fuck does this asshole know about masculinity? He pees standing up. That's about it.
About how even though these manosphere models are not good models for young men, we on the left also have to acknowledge you have to provide an alternative that's interesting and positive. And I don't know that it has really been done. And we spoke about this last time we talked a little bit. I don't know that that model has really been built in a way that can compete. Now, part of the reason it can't compete is these, extremely interesting characters. I mean, I don't know if you saw the video of Andrew Tate being arrested recently. Even just his physical appearance, it's extremely, it attracts the eye. It's unusual and it's.
He was wearing red or something, back to colors and thumbnails.
It was like capri pants.
Yeah, the
and
pants.
Tasseled loafers with like a purple shirt.
Purple, maybe it was purple. I remember it was very colorful. It's interesting.
It's visually interesting.
Very visually interesting.
And also, when you say extreme things, it attracts more attention. So I don't know what the solution is, but we need better models of masculinity. And where I think the left has sort of failed is the narrative of toxic masculinity.
Whoa. This might be progress here. Hold on, guys.
Know what the solution is, but we need better models of masculinity. And where I think, and also when you say extreme things, it attracts more attention. So I don't know what the solution is, but we need better models of masculinity. And where
I don't know what the solution is, but we need better models of masculinity. Well, why don't you know what the solution is, David? Isn't this your thing? Aren't you like culturally enlightened? You just said that connecting with young men within the context of masculinity is important to you. So what the hell is this?
I think the left has sort of failed is the narrative of toxic masculinity is bad as a primary message about
pull people away.
I think it pushes people away, and it only makes them more susceptible to being pulled in by people like Tate.
So and I appreciate that, and I think there's some truth to that there was sort of an over-indexing in that toxic frame, and we lost folks. And so what is the positive alternative? And that's the challenge. How do you make? I mean, these guys have one thing in common. I think it's more the boyosphere than the manosphere from the attention perspective, and I think you look at the audience in some respects that's the case. But there is a toxicity which one has to acknowledge because they filled the void. Right. So how do we fill the void? Is there? I mean, you say we're not there yet. Do you see any contours of? There's some examples of people that are competing in that space?
I think there are. I mean, listen, I since no longer being president, I think President Obama has done a couple of really interesting things in speaking to young boys and men. And one of them is really creating this frame where it's masculine to raise people up around you and to make people feel better so that they are their best selves in their community. The alpha beta male stuff and these tropes of masculinity that people like Tate and others, how to insult women so that they like you, this sort of stuff. Let's raise people up. What's more masculine than saying, hey, you know what? I have the confidence that raising others up isn't going to diminish me, and it's not zero sum. I think these are sort of some of the ideas that would much better serve the left and serve young men and boys than the stuff from the manosphere that they're getting on the right.
Well said. You speak of serving. I mean, what do public servants, what do people in positions of power and influence, and those with formal authority, what should we be doing in the context of addressing the systemic issues in this space, moving beyond just the issue of the manosphere and the challenges with men and boys and the issues, again, that you highlight in this book? What do we need to pay attention to in terms of a regulatory framework or not, in terms of leaning in, socializing, highlighting, creating a different cultural construct? Is it FCC? What do we need to be doing in this space?
The micro answer is different in so many different areas, but I think the macro of it is that there's a feeling. So I mentioned at the beginning of our conversation, a lot of the people I talk to don't vote because they have not yet understood the connection between voting and their day-to-day lives. We've got to relink that connection. Once that's done, there's a feeling that governments, state, federal, move too slowly to really solve problems for people. And so there's a lot of situations people are in that are urgent. Issues of housing, out of a job, food instability, issues with children, et cetera.
The BS that is then the easy answer and the scapegoat in the context of the algorithms and the filter bubble.
That's a good point and a way to look at it. I think that if people come to believe that there are systems in place that can respond to the specific problems people are having, because it's great when someone announces, we have just secured X amount of funding, which will be distributed over Y years to start working on. That's great. But there's people who are like, I'm in a crisis now. What is available to me? Some people do have services available and they don't know about it. So that's about communication. But I think there's this feeling for a lot of people that even if they vote and they change who's in power, the system's moving move too slowly and they're too clunky to really help them.
And so, I mean, it's a system delivery issue? Is it an expectation setting issue? I mean, it takes time to build a house.
That's right.
Even if you have the permits, even if you have the land use reforms, it takes time to construct it. And we can improve productivity, focus on modular housing, prefab housing. You can eliminate some of that friction, but it still takes time. How much of this is just level setting versus just exploitation of people's grievances?
I think a lot of it is level setting and communication. One of the things that I kind of have to admit that Donald Trump has picked up on that's useful politically is to make declarations on Truth Social and to sign executive orders, which are effectively memos asking someone to do something, which make a lot of his followers believe that he is doing the things he promised when he is actually not. I'm not suggesting that elected officials on the left start deliberately lying about the things that they're going to do, but the lesson is communication, especially if it's honest and it's going to be backed up by action, is a lot. And so, when you hear about we're considering writing a strongly worded letter, for my audience, that's like, what are you talking about? You've lost me. Lost
or
me.
an op-ed. Yes, let's get in the New York Times.
Yeah.
It'll be 100 likes.
Right.
I agree with that. So it all touches on where we are as a party. And you've called out the Democratic Party, sort of the Sunday show buttoned up party versus, being able to play in this, in the new arena that is self-evident that you've been a huge part of over the last 20 plus years. But what is the lesson today from the modern Democratic Party? What would you be advising if you were the head of the DNC that the party itself do, if there is, or even do you believe in the construct top down, or is it really bottom up and it's about 1,000 different points of light, so to speak?
I think there's value to structure, but there is a lot of bottom up stuff. I mean, some of the most successful campaigns that just dominate social media are built from the bottom up with people who are really good on social media. I do think that being less structured is something I've told a lot of staffers. They want the questions ahead of time, which we never do. They say,
you really get that still?
We really get it. We just had a situation. I haven't said.
I gave you all the questions. That's an exception. This was a special case.
We recently had a situation where a staffer talked to my producer and said, what are we going to talk about? 7, 8 things were kind of mentioned. It was a 15-minute conversation, which I think is also a problem. But how can you talk about 8 things in 15 minutes? We got to 2. And then my producer got a call saying, I was disappointed that the focus was only on those 2. And I said, well, hold on a second.
Yeah, give us 15 minutes.
And this was the range of.
Latina Mafune dropping some knowledge again. Churches that play a major role in the socialization of boys in conservative spaces indoctrinate them with gendered constructs of masculinity that aren't compatible with respect of women's agency. Yeah, couldn't agree more. Having grown up in a conservative Christian household, I can tell you with superlative certainty that the conservative version of the New Testament that conservative Christians, aka Bible beaters, like to invoke is indeed a patriarchal narrative. And it's only through some modernization of interpretations of the New Testament where it doesn't come across as patriarchal. You'd have to go check out Ben Dixon or other hardcore Christians or progressive Christians on the left who can explain it to you. But patriarchy is all in the Bible, both Old Testament and New, and it's disturbing.
Things that would be discussed. I can't force Dave. I'm not in David's ear saying move on to the next topic. So that stuff I think makes the end product feel extremely stiff.
Yeah.
People don't relate to it.
That goes to the authenticity.
That goes to the authenticity piece. And I think being less structured, appearing in less structured situations, I think is only good. And you got to hand it to Trump during the 24 campaign. He spent 3 hours with the Nelk boys, and he's talking to Lex Friedman, and he's with Rogan, and he's not.
You've been on Lex as well, by the way.
I spoke to Lex as well. Yeah. I think that worked. Even if he's telling lies, the fact that he's there and it feels relaxed and unstructured goes a really long way with voters.
So that's one piece of advice. What else? I mean, so this notion of abundance, I think we talked around that. I mean, we haven't used the word abundance, so you didn't use the word abundance. I use it often, and I certainly embrace the frame. People are just sick and tired of process and the paralysis of process. They want to physically see the results.
Yes.
It's proof of concept, but I want to see results. Don't tell me you've housed 68,000 people, Newsom, which, by the way, we have through Project HomeKey. Don't tell me that. I want to see it physically on the streets. Otherwise, I don't believe you, and we're losing trust. And obviously, that is exploited, and obviously, it's creating a lot of friction, and it's politically challenging. So, what else do you advise in the context of the Democratic Party in terms of getting back on its feet, getting back into its sort of ascendant position, getting off the map? Matt, obviously, there's no, for all the animus that has developed, increasing animus, not just the Democratic Party and independents, but increasingly his own base against Donald Trump. It's not inherent to the benefit of the Democratic Party.
I think that the focus really has to be on the economic situation. One of the mistakes that I saw with President Biden's re-election campaign while it was going on, and then with the Harris campaign when it became the Harris campaign, was a lot of pointing to, but don't people see the economic numbers? Things are really good. And they may be really good for a bunch of people and not good for a lot of others. But if people don't feel that things are good, and you're telling them they are, of course they're not going to think you'll make anything better. You're saying everything's fine to begin with. And this is why I think Barack Obama's 2012 campaign did this very well, where he said, we've made a lot of progress getting out of the Great Recession, and we still have a long way to go. And here are the 3 or 4 things I'm going to focus on. It felt much more like, okay, I can acknowledge this is no longer 2008. And also, this is still a climb that we are in the middle of. And then you need to have policies you can actually deliver on. So that's where Donald.
That's where everybody falls short in this circle. Whether it's Pakman, Newsom, any moderate, remotely moderate Dem, they don't talk about Medicare for all, raising the minimum wage, student loan debt relief, freeing nonviolent drug offenders. They don't, reforming prisons, reforming immigration. They don't get specific. When in doubt, look for the specificity, guys. If the specificity isn't there, the person you're listening to is full of shit.
Trump made a huge mistake, which is gas will be down 50%. Everything will be cheaper. It's going to be a new glory, and gas is over $4 a gallon nationally and much more in certain parts of the country. You have to have some possibility of delivering on what you're asking.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, my own confession, you have a confession chapter, but I was out there stumping for Biden. I was making the same point. Inflation's cooling, the economy's booming, best jobs market since the 1960s, lowest unemployment for blacks, for women, for those with disabilities. We had record job growth. We were reducing the deficit and debt. We had these unbelievable bipartisan deals, 400 bipartisan legislative victories, some of the most iconic being, IRA, the issues around infrastructure, chips and science. And it was all about the aggregate.
Right.
And people don't live in the aggregate. And they weren't feeling it. And you're right. That was, that landed like a thud.
Yeah, that and immigration, I think, were two areas that weren't landing well with a lot of voters. And here's the progress we've made, but then here's the North Star. There is a kind of transition there that's relatively smooth, which I think makes people feel a lot more heard. And as unrealistic as Donald Trump's promises were, at least they sounded tangible. Completely unrealistic. And we all were saying this will never happen, but they sounded like specific, tangible promises. Gas is going to be half the price. Of course, it's not going to be, but that sounds tangible. I can imagine what that would be like.
Yeah, drill, baby, drill. But it's interesting. I then go back to your book. The flip side of that is you also make the point that identity politics works a hell of a lot better than policy-laden, 5-point plans. So we want to talk about the economy, blending an identity frame back to my sort of PTS on immigration, blaming immigrants, blaming Somalis, just blaming the other. The effectiveness of doing so as
I call this scapegoat politics. Please help me popularize that term. Scapegoat politics is fascism's favorite formula. It plays off of rural voters and their lack of life experience with people who are different from them, whether they be black, brown, Indian, whatever.
An economic message. Your rents are high, right, because of all of the illegals that Biden has brought over the border.
Yeah.
How do you square that circle without becoming them?
Well, my view on identity politics has always been,
Latino Mafune MVP of the day. So-called abundance is just the latest way the money handlers want to trick the working class into believing that they shouldn't be free to own and control the fruit of their own labor as they would under democratic socialism. Yeah, that's right. The abundance manifesto is garbage.
I'm in favor of the identity politics that's used as a cudgel to silence people, which is like, hey, listen, I'm a member of X group. I'm the one who gets to speak, decide, and sort of lay down the law. I'm interested in identity insofar as it can be used to bolster an economic message, and that people of certain identities may indeed be the best position to tell us about their experience. And I'm speaking with, I'm doing a panel on the Latino vote in a few weeks. And one of the messages that I want to bring is it's great to think about Latino voters as a group. And also we should consider that their economic interests are the same of any voter. And that we need to be thinking about that as, let's not necessarily separate them out as it is a group with a particular background and some shared interests, but also their concerns are the concerns of the average everyday American. So you've got to do both.
Amen. I mean, I how many Latino audience I've been in talking about immigration and people are like, stop, you're patronizing us. That's not the only issue. Of course.
Identity politics with respect to empathizing, doing the empathetic arithmetic for certain populations, no problem. Within a collective context, identity politics makes sense. On an individual level, when it comes to elected officials, people like Hakeem Jeffries, Salud Carbajal, Richie Torres, Cory Booker, Jim Clyburn, these people use identity politics to justify neoliberal capitalism, to deflect criticism of neoliberal capitalism. And that's a problem.
So much of the issues around immigration have disproportionately obviously impacted our immigrant communities and by definition, mixed status families and obviously Latino community. But that point is foundational. So let's back up a little bit to the DSA in the context of the sort of emergence of a new narrative. Ability to call out the victim, the villain, a little bit more clearly. Communication that seems a little bit more effective, certainly electorally, has been effective in some cases. We can overread. We tend to color things in. A few examples then become sort of the dominant norm or the meme that suggests something bigger than itself. But where are you, just in terms of you talked about the platform, but where are you in the context of looking at the DSA in the context of the Democratic Party's future in terms of?
This is an absolutely huge question. This is why I'm watching this video, is to hear Pakman answer this question.
the narrative in terms of sort of being repairers of this party brand?
So a couple things. I am not sure what things will look like 10, 50, or 100 years from now in terms of Donald Trump always says this will never be a socialist or communist country. I don't think it's going to be one in the next 5 to 10 years. Never is a really long-term play. I don't know what's going to happen in the next 100 years. I do think that right now, the success in some circles of these DSA candidates should be a red alert for the Democratic Party in that there are many voters who are extraordinarily disaffected with the party. They don't want to vote for Republicans. And there's this other thing that they're finding preferable to the Democratic establishment. Really important message. If you ignore that message, if Democrats ignore that message, it's like the Republicans ignoring the Tea Party in 2010. We saw what happened. So that's extremely interesting and relevant. On the specifics, 10 years ago, when I would interview DSA people, socialists, et cetera, they would say to me very soberly, they would go, listen, David, I'm a socialist, you're not, but our next stops on this bus are the same. And so I see myself as united with you. If and when we get to social democracy and the things we agree on, we get people healthcare, et cetera, then the social democrats and the bona fide socialists can have an argument about whether we go further or not. I really respected that. That was a very interesting conversation to have. There wasn't a litmus test that was imposed on me as someone who is not a socialist. That's very different now, where I regularly get emails and see comments where people saying, you're with us or against us. It doesn't matter if we agree on universal healthcare and a few other things. We believe housing should be government owned and people are assigned a house and blah, blah, blah. I go, I don't believe that. Do I think people should be homeless? No. Can I point to things that have been done in St. Louis and in Salt Lake City to just give people housing and how it's actually cheaper than
So he kind of concedes the wartime context, but then backs out of it. It's really weird. He's just such a pussy. At the end of the day, sorry if that's offensive, but there's just no better word than describe David A. Pakman. Pussy.
on the street? Yes, for homeless folks, that absolutely. But I'm not a take away private ownerships, and then then you're simply not part of the same movement. This is not everybody, but these are some of the conversations.
He's mischaracterized. The Vanguard guys do good coverage on this part. He mischaracterizes what democratic socialism is. He doesn't even know. And he's about to talk about social democracy and how it's different. He doesn't even know the difference. He doesn't know what the hell he's talking about.
So I feel like the tone of these conversations is very different today than it was 8-10 years ago.
So so fast forward, do you believe this is a truly robust movement that will continue to gain momentum? Or do you feel like it's at peak at the moment on the basis of some of these local elections with national implications and obviously with Mamdani's sort of ascendancy as a bright star in the Democratic movement?
Predictions are so tough. I don't think this is the peak, but I don't see a desire right now for this to become widespread in terms of the candidates that the Democratic Party nominates. It's really up to the voters. And so that's where I hesitate to say this will not go further or it will. It'll be up to voters to decide. And part of it also has to do with whether Democrats are putting forward interesting and authentic candidates with good ideas. If the alternative to the DSA actual socialists, which by the way, a lot of them aren't actual socialists, but some of them are, that doesn't really matter. A lot of this is labeling. If the alternative is a terrible centrist Democrat, that helps this DSA movement. If there are interesting people that are to the left of the centrist Democrats, but not socialists, that's the best thing that they can do in a lot of these districts. The other thing is Michigan and Iowa and Connecticut and New York City are very different places. And this is a huge country with a lot of different people. So I think it's difficult to make any kind of overarching prediction about something like that.
This whole thing about how the geographic, the demographic, and psychographic diversity is going to mean we need different platforms based on where you're running your campaign is garbage. These are universal needs: healthcare, housing, education, environment, elections, guns, cops, criminal justice. These are not nuanced issues. These are very straightforward. The only nuance comes when you actually have to write the policy and get into the details of the law. But there should be universal agreement that all of these problems need serious attention yesterday. And Pakman's not really acknowledging that. Latino Mafune, another MVP comment here. Maybe people who don't know basic things like the difference between personal and private property shouldn't be analysts. If he does know the difference, then he's setting up a straw man. Argument. Yes, he is. He's straw manning democratic socialism because he knows he can't defeat it on its merits. Again, we're not running into FDR's second Bill of Rights, which I don't understand why anyone isn't drawing on that. That's another thing. I don't know. I'm trying to work a video into doing that soon.
The word centrist, it's interesting. What is centrist? Centrist in policy, centrist in attitude, centrist is the establishment. Centrist is an incumbent.
I think
what is the centrist? Centrist is a corporate Democrat. What's centrist? What is
like you're a corporate Democrat, Gavin. You just tripped on it. Call him out, Pakman. If Pakman had any balls right now, I'd be like, yeah, you're a corporate Democrat. You're a centrist. You're a neoliberal. You're not a progressive.
Definitely. I'm curious. People use the word centrist.
I don't use it as a pejorative. Some people do. I don't use it as for me, centrist is you're basically happy with how things are, and you're satisfied with the changes you want to make being really on the fringes.
Yeah, you're an
not-
incrementalist.
Yeah, and incrementalism I'm okay with. I mean, Ted Kennedy was an incrementalist, and he had a lot of incremental successes that he spearheaded in the Senate. But things are basically fine, and I don't want to change much of anything. I think we need more than that.
Incrementalism is the death of progress, people. Incrementalism is how we fucking got here. Corporate interests destroyed the integrity of the system. To suggest otherwise is to ignore facts of the last 45 years. Incrementalism is a good thing? Give me a break, dude. The hell are you talking about?
Not socialism,
right?
And I'm certainly not communism, but I'm also not like things are basically fine.
Right. Radical centrism.
Yeah, I've never met one. Have you met a radical centrist?
I don't know. What was Obama in this? And how would we describe him?
Neoliberal.
Oh boy, depends who you ask.
Yeah.
See,
I mean,
again, this is the test. I got to come up with a list of words that, like, if you don't have this vocabulary, I really don't respect your political opinion. If you don't know what neoliberalism is, neoliberal Newsom, here it is. Like, if you don't know what it is, then fuck off and die. But basically, if you don't want to use the labels, it's getting into the private sector being the solution to our problems. The private sector leading the way. That's what neoliberalism is. That's what capitalism is. And it's garbage. The private sector is not a panacea. The private sector, especially the private sector defined by massive corporations, does not have the American public's best interests at heart. That is intuitive. That is obvious. You just have to think about it and say it.
I mean, he defends the incremental side of Obamacare. He didn't get everything, but he makes the point we made progress. Don't make enemy a perfect enemy of the good framework. Is that would that play well today?
Today it's playing pretty poorly with the left part of the base. I mean, in my first book I talked about the successes of incrementalism, and if you look at the three big eras of advancement for the left in the United States, which were the progressive era in the early 20th century, you looked at the New Deal era after World War II, and you looked at the Civil Rights era. In retrospect, it feels like big change, and it was hugely significant changes. But at the time, it was a lot of, hey, we got a Supreme Court pick who 10 years from now is going to be part of a really important decision, either on women's voting or on civil rights or et cetera. We've made another tweak to the programs of FDR. So the incrementalism has a pretty strong track record in the United States. It's okay to go seemingly slowly, as long as you're going in the right direction and you're basically done making the changes.
Pussy.
I'm okay with incrementalism. And I often say to the accelerationists who say, we got to take all businesses and make them government controlled, housing,
what you want more of,
break it all down. I asked them for examples of where that has worked.
Pissed?
And so far, nobody's given me any.
Watch this fucking bullshit.
Was Biden's biggest challenge?
I won't interrupt this time.
Making the changes. I'm okay with programs of FDR. So the incrementalism has a pretty strong track record in the United States. It's okay to go seemingly slowly, as long as you're going in the right direction and you're not basically done making the changes. I'm okay with incrementalism. And I often say to the accelerationists who say, we got to take all businesses and make them government controlled, housing, et cetera, break it all down. I asked them for examples of where that has worked. And so far, nobody's given me any.
Was Biden's biggest challenge communication? Was he an incrementalist? Was he a centrist?
Yes.
You think universally people describe him, quote unquote, as a centrist. But did his policies suggest that?
Yes.
Or was it the rhetoric, the style?
I think Biden's style made him seem like a status quo guy, but he ran on paper to the left of where President Obama ran, both in 2008 and 2012. Times had changed, right? I mean, it was 12 years later, 8 years later. But I think in policy, President Biden was not really just a status quo centrist. He didn't get as much done as I think he would have liked to. But I think he's center left, a step towards left of that, I guess I would say.
Right. So it's just interesting to me because I think about an industrial policy that's worker centered. Biden
neoliberalism. If they do not use the term neoliberalism, I have no respect for their views.
On that, I mean,
and neither should you.
Populism to that.
He's one of the most
America first. Buy American products first. The framework around actually having living wages, union wages. The guy walked picket lines, save pensions. I mean, he was a populist in that respect, and actually delivered on all those things. It's sort of interesting to me. What would you do? Back to the policies, not to rhetoric. What would you do? You would try to mimic some of those things. You would take the Chips and Science Act. You would try to bring supply chains back home. You would try to focus on the blue collar workers. You try to deliver on low carbon green growth. I mean, the Green New Deal in so many respects was reflected in his policies in terms of the incentives and the tax structures that he provided. Those seem to be a lot of the things that the left is promoting that he actually delivered situationally.
I think
that's what I'm trying to sort of figure out is, but was he the sellout? I mean, what am I missing on that?
No, I think President Biden was probably the most pro-organized labor president in my lifetime, probably. But I mean, for a while, only president to walk an active picket line. It's sort of lame and pedantic to say he was limited by the House and Senate and the political environment and what he could get done, but that is a reality to some degree. Right. It's hard, but Biden was not, from a personality standpoint, the type of person that would get the further left excited, even if he delivered on some important things. Yeah, I think that's the truth of it.
So that gets to just back to style, rhetoric, the ability to communicate in this new medium that we need to quote unquote pay attention to. Clips, virality. social media, Ron Dunning's ascendancy, so much of that attached
Yes.
to his appeal in that space, so much of AOC's appeal in that space. Obviously, the movement that is, was Howard Dean, was, mybarackobama.com, self-organizing communities, that is all things Bernie Sanders. So much of that, again, is self-organizing and is driven by these algorithms, driven by these clips, driven by virality, driven by these filter bubbles as well. So is that, what do we learn? What's the takeaway as we start to knit together what you're communicating here that we all need to pay attention to in terms of how our, we've moved from search to suggest, and how all of a sudden now our behaviors are not only just commoditized, but we're becoming perfect little sheep in some respects to the machine. How do we start to knit together a framework, restoring and repairing
We've been that for
our
a while,
democracy,
dude.
Democratizing our economy so we can save our democracy.
Revolution.
And knit back a political framework that actually could build a majority
Revolution.
and distill a sense of well-being
Get pissed
at a
and
time we're
fucking
so
fight.
desperate to, just take a deep breath and
No,
breathe again.
fuck that.
I think at the individual level,
Take a
people
deep
should
breath
understand
after we
how they're being
crush them.
manipulated by these algorithms. That's something every single person who's on these platforms should do. Democrats, the left, elected officials, candidates need to become better at using these platforms. And
'Cause they're
I don't
not
think there's
bright.
any moral high ground to be gained by saying we're not going to do that and then we'll just lose. I don't think that's good for the average person living in this country. I don't think that's good for anybody. That just
You're a
cedes power
fucking
to
idiot.
some of
What
the
did
worst
he just
people.
say? I want to know what that he just said again.
These platforms should do. Democrats, the left, elected officials, candidates need to become better at using these platforms. And I don't think there's any moral high ground to be gained by saying we're not going to do that and then we'll just lose. I don't think that's good for the average person living in this country. I don't think that's good for anybody. That just cedes power to some of the worst people.
So it's their inability. They need to get better at using the platforms. Doesn't have to do with the messaging. Doesn't have to do with what they're already trying to use these platforms for. Maybe it's the content that they're working with, Dave. And that content is produced by neoliberal leadership, neoliberal incrementalists. And when you embrace neoliberalism, guys, it's one step forward and 3 steps back. Because neoliberalism is nothing more than the intellectual capitulation to baby boomer conservative capitalism.
The difficult one is the regulation piece.
Yeah,
There are
back
really
to what we
varied
should do.
appetites as to what degree should there be regulation of AI, large language models, and all of this stuff. I don't know that I don't believe the immediate solution is going to come from regulation, especially with the people that are in power right now. And so it would be nice to have a regulatory framework that makes sense. Neil Postman, who was a technologist, he would write, time spent opposing new technologies is basically worthless. This is my paraphrasing. What society needs to do is figure out the right type and level of regulation of new technologies and how to maximize the good while limiting the bad. That's essentially my view on these algorithms, these platforms, and on AI. I don't think that the idea of stopping them dead in their tracks and eliminating them is even plausible. And no matter what the United States does, some other countries aren't going to do that, and it's going to be there, it's going to spread. So I would rather skip to the let's maximize the good, figure out what level of regulation we need to limit the bad, and educate people. A lot of kids don't even get media literacy anymore at all. It's just not taught in school. Educate people so that they understand how these algorithms work. We have a sort of understanding that advertising wants to influence us. When we see advertising messages, when we recognize them, sometimes they're hidden, but when we see advertising, we understand this is an influence campaign to get me to believe something, buy something, a service, product. If you're a kid, go and tell mom and dad, this is what I want. We need people to understand how the algorithms work and the platforms in the same way so that they realize this is not just naturally surfacing content to my interest. This is stuff that is being ABC tested.
Narrow shoulders, open mind. Thank you for commenting. Procreate and see how much crush some energy you have. Become a part of real polity. Become part of the future. Are you suggesting that we're not at war? Narrow shoulders, open mind. I'm curious in your perspective, because my whole pitch right now is to get everybody to see that we're at war. Once we're on the same page about being at war, then we can come up with a really good strategy for winning and counterattacking for the next 4 years, so that the silent generation of baby boomer voters can die out. Because once the silent generation of baby boomer voters die out, we should have a way better public psyche.
Constantly for emotional salience and attachment, and then fed to you. And if people understood that, a lot of these manipulations would be less effective.
So this is your prescription as the head of the DNC, that we take advantage of these tools. We don't act holier than thou. We recognize that we deal with the cards that have been dealt.
Absolutely.
We're pragmatists.
Have to be. And listen, I think that there are campaigns that have figured it out. There are elected officials that have figured it out, that have really good digital offices. I think what your office has done with the reflecting back to Trump, the way he communicates has been interesting. And it's when you see that, right, all caps, Gavin, see Newsom, all that stuff, it triggers something where it's like, oh, I recognize this style. Oh, but it's not Trump. At least people are stopping and thinking. And that's something. And so I think that being creative about that is important.
Yeah, no, I obviously appreciate that. What just as we, what do you hope people will appreciate about this book? What ultimately is it just to illuminate? Is it to change behavior? Is it to sort of begin to act with the kind of friction that you try to highlight in here? Is it to step outside, take a deep? What's the ultimate action that you hope this inspires? You didn't just write it for the intellectual exercise. You're a doer, not just a dreamer in that respect. What's the takeaway?
I think three things depending on the position people are in. One, if you're just an individual on these platforms, or you have kids who are on these platforms, you have to understand how they work and how they're trying to influence you in order to take control of them. So that's number one. Number two, when it comes to the political system, which I have an interest in, I want good people in power putting in policies that I want, that I think are good policies for people. That group needs to also get better at using these platforms. That's number two. And then number three, understanding at a systemic level why the right has been better at this, because if you don't understand that, you can't possibly change it. So those are the three things.
Is politics, don't we also need just politics has infected every part of our life, hasn't it?
Yes.
I mean, we talked about Trump. We were talking about obviously the world. I mean, I used to love sports because it wasn't political. It was one place to get good breathe. Now it's everything's political. You
Yeah.
can't have a conversation in our life. So fishing is political. Fill in the blank, whatever the issue is.
It has.
Now it's become, I mean, is that also something we need to start to address fundamentally?
Yeah, I think
we need a detox
I
from
would
politics
push
a
back
little
and
bit?
say I think politics has been more political for longer than maybe we want to acknowledge. But what we've lost is the ability to have disagreements that don't need to ruin interpersonal relationships. And that I think, there's a lot of people now who are very uncomfortable with the fact that there's a disagreement. And sometimes I'll say, I know X person in real life and we disagree, but we're able to get along. How is that possible? Well, because there's multiple dimensions to people, and maybe you don't relate to someone as an elected official, but you relate to them as a parent, or you relate to them as a Latino person, or in some other way. And it's become very toxic, accelerated by these platforms, where because all you do is argue on Twitter, when you get together and there's a sporting event or an entertainment thing, the assumption is we have to have bad blood and we can't just sit in the same room. We've got to do away with that. And again, the whole
bullshit. Again, here we are again. It is a war. And I am interested in the politics of social exclusion. If you voted for Trump 3 times or you still defend MAGA, I don't want anything to do with you. I don't want you near my kids. I don't want you teaching my kids. I don't want you doing anything near me or my friends or family. You are an agent of evil. This is war, people, right? They're like, and you're about to hear him go on, basically say that he's got some friends who are racist and he just tolerates that because he's open-minded or something. I mean, people will take advantage of your open-mindedness and attitude of acceptance, guys. That's what's happened, okay? That's why Republicans ran all over Obama, because he was too goddamn nice.
The interactions online are toxic. The interactions in person are very polite and respectful. I think the in-person has a lot to do with that.
Do you think there's a
Great
business
point,
model for
Cuomo.
point-counterpoint crossfire today? Or is it just, I don't want to hear the other side.
No, I think
honestly,
there is-
as a business proposition.
There are a lot of
Shows where we
there's a
have
lot
just
of
two people
shows-
going back and forth.
There's a lot of shows out there like that right now. I think that they are diminishing a little bit. A year to 18 months ago, I would have said these inflammatory debates, and some of them are 1-on-1, some are 4-on-4, some are 1-on-20. This is what people want. The thing about debates that I've talked about is that they rarely are adjudications of who's right or the best ideas. They're adjudications of who's most articulate and most prepared for the debate.
That's true.
And that might line up with what's right and what's true. But the algorithms, as we find out, they don't surface what's accurate. They surface what gets an emotional reaction from people. So I don't know that that's the way to figure out what we need to do.
It's so true. I just think about debates that I did one with Ron DeSantis. And again, back into the filter bubble. A few people actually watched the entire thing. What most people said that they watched it, they saw the clips that were shared within their feed, which only reinforced and expressed their pre-existing bias.
That's right.
So the point of view is you got crushed, or you crushed it. When there's nuance, and we've lost so much of that nuance. But again, nuance doesn't sell.
I remember watching the entire thing, and there actually was some deeper
This is
discussion.
profound here. Latina Mafune dropping knowledge again. Thank you for contributing, Latina Mafune. You're fantastic. Identity politics informed by class struggle and structural analysis is progressive. Identity politics uninformed by that is reactionary. I would rephrase this in my language and say diversity left on its own devolves into tribalism over time. You need an educated and enlightened public to engage in that diversity in the right way, or in a generally positive way, as opposed to a competitive way, which is what, the context that defines our race relations in this country right now is the competitive part.
Of policy, which I found interesting, missing from all of the clips that each side made to
That's
kind of
the problem.
reinforce. Yeah, it's I don't know how we move
the
forward on
normalization
what's best for
is
the
what
country. When
I think bothers a lot of leftists most about Newsom and Pakman and guys like this. It's like, oh, well, we got to just accept these people as normal and try to reason with them. It's like, no, dude, you're still in denial about who these people are. This is my value, guys. This is why I'm on the platform. It's not because I have all the answers. It's not because I know who's good and who's bad on the left, even though I've got a lot of the answers and do know who's good and who's bad on the left to a certain extent. It's that I know the enemy. I know the will of the religious right. I know the will of the NRA right. I know the will of the Confederate flag waving right. And most often, I know the will of the heartless 1%er right. The MAGA trash that were at Trump's inauguration 2 years ago. You know, I'm talking about Bezos and Zuckerberg. Those people. Yeah, I know what they're like. I know how their sociopathy works. Thank you for sticking around, guys.
That's the kind of media
Almost
environment
done.
that we live in.
Well, you were supposed to be able to answer that question, but you've just posed yet another question for your next book. But in September, this book, which technically is your next book, already written, pay attention how the algorithms and media wars are suppressing truth and rewiring our brain. David, it's been great to have you.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thanks for being here.
All right, moving on to Jon Favreau and Pod Save America. And they are going to be talking about some horse race stuff. This is kind of like, I don't know who's going to win 2028. I know whoever the nominee is in 2028 for the Democratic Party will likely be our next president, in line with what happened in 2008 on the heels of George W. Bush being one of the worst presidents in American history. So this will be interesting. I'm open-minded about these people, but none of them are really progressive. They're all neoliberals. Let's get back to Mifune one more time. The enlightened life in the polity under a free democracy only can exist between those who embrace the light of reason. We cannot pretend we live only among good actors. Ain't that the truth? And that's why I'm all about conflict, Latino Mifune. In conflict, there is honesty. In conflict, there is truth. In conflict, there is progress, however painful it may be. And that's my message to the lefties is, what do you do when the bully knocks you on your ass? You get back up and you take a swing at him. And then everybody watches and sees that you're fighting back, and then they get involved. And that's what we got to do on the left, is we got to be the fist to the face of MAGA trash conservatives. Jon Favreau, everybody.
On today's show, writer and founder of the Slow Boring newsletter, Matt Iglesias. We've had a lot of people on the show make the case for why the Democratic Party should move to the left, and a lot of progressive candidates who represent that direction. We've also had plenty of people, including us, critique the Democratic establishment. We haven't really had someone on, at least in a while, make a full-throated case for a center-left politics that emphasizes moderation. I know that probably sounds exciting and not at all annoying to many of you. Matt recently wrote a piece titled How the Center Left Can Come Back in 2028 that's based in part on a series of critical, tough questions that Nate Silver recently posed to the center left. I found both Nate's questions and Matt's response really useful in understanding where folks like Matt are coming from and what they're looking for from the party in 2028 and beyond. I also had plenty of questions of my own, so I invited Matt on to see if he had some answers, and he did. We talked about how important issue positions are in a presidential primary, the role of charisma and the ability to get attention, why Democrats have lost in recent elections, and who on the current bench might be able to win in 2028. It was a great conversation, and we will get to it in a moment. Before we do, please consider becoming a paying subscriber to Friends of the Pod. Subscribers unlock ad-free episodes of all their favorite crooked pods, including Pod Save America, all our great subscriber-only newsletters, and exclusive subscriber-only podcasts like Pod Save America Only Friends and Polar Coaster with Dan Pfeiffer. Plus, becoming a subscriber is the best way to support your favorite pro-democracy independent media company. Head on over to crooked.com/friends to subscribe. Matt, welcome to Pod Save America.
Really good to be here.
So I want to talk about the factional debate within the Democratic Party over how to actually win some national elections, and thought, who better to do that with than the online left's favorite pundit, who can faithfully represent the views of the neolib shill faction. And I think a good place to start is with your recent piece about how the center left can come back.
Wow.
The neolib shill faction. And I think a good place to start is with your recent piece about how the center left can come back in 2028, where your one big answer is that the center left needs a 2028 presidential primary campaign that articulates its critique of the status quo. Before we get to the critique itself, why a presidential campaign?
You know, I think something we see in politics is that political parties are really defined by their presidential campaigns and by their leadership. Everybody, I mean, you, me, people with all different kinds of ideological viewpoints are frustrated about where Democrats are at now, and they want them to be clearer and have a better message. But realistically, there's just not that much that Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries can do. You're herding cats on Capitol Hill. It's presidential campaigns. Donald Trump comes in, he wins a nomination. It totally redefines what the Republican Party is about, for good and for ill. And that's what's going to happen in 28, right? There's going to be a contest. Somebody is going to win it. That person will be the leader. What Democrats stand for is going to be, largely whatever it is that person stands for. And until then, you try to have good candidates in the key races. You hope they win. Everyone's going to have some who they like more than others, but it's going to be a mess.
Yeah, I thought about that after the 2025 off-year elections, when everyone had this Goldilocks view of it, where they're like, well, you had some more center-left moderate candidates winning in some places, and Mamdani wins in New York, and so it's all great. We don't have to fight that much. It's like, well, yeah, it's easier to do in a midterm or a set of off-year elections than a presidential election. That's where the rubber hits the road. So you make clear that this center-left critique is a critique of what you call the Clinton, Biden, Harris, Schumer status quo. How would you describe that status quo, and what is your critique of it?
Sure. So I think there's been some pretty dramatic leftward moves in the Democratic Party since Barack Obama's second term. And this has not been like the left, quote unquote, Bernie Sanders, his people taking the party over. It's been establishment stewardship, but they've shifted on a lot of different things. Some of them minor, some of them big. I mean, I think a notable one that I read about in the piece is education policy, where without really like a huge rancorous debate about it, ideas about performance pay for teachers, ideas about supporting high-performing charter schools that, the Obama White House had championed, and it was controversial at the time inside the party, just sort of went in the other direction. And then we had, a lot of discussion about this around COVID and school closures and different things there. But, Democrats had an identity as a party of reform of the public sector that has sort of gone away in that regard. Democrats have also, shifted a lot on immigration over the past 10 to 15 years, right? There's been all this stuff about asylum that came up during the Biden presidency, just wasn't really an issue that people were thinking that much about during the Obama presidency. There was this kind of very specific focus on trying to get a path to citizenship for people who've been here for a long time. New things came up. Democrats have, gone through a number of cycles around crime and criminal justice reform since that time, but have been sort of seen in some circles as very soft on crime. I think left-wing Democrats have started to see that this is a problem. Everyone has sort of walked back, defunding police, things like that since then. But there's been this kind of and then on economic policy, there's been a shift. Again, it was a shift in the Biden administration to these kind of much more Elizabeth Warren-like positions about, the role of business, its relationship to the state. It used to be kind of a view that, Democrats were a party that was going to make rich people pay higher taxes. And that was going to be a non-starter for a lot of rich people in the country. But for people who could stand that, who could say, you know what, I'm going to pay more under the Democrats, I'm going to contribute to the common will, I'm going to help the poor, whatever, I'm still going to be treated respectfully, as if business is a laudable thing to do with your career. And there's been shifts on both sides of that, a much more contentious relationship between the Democratic Party and the technology industry, but really the Democratic Party and the business world writ large.
So I take your point that the party has definitely shifted leftward on a number of issues, and I can just speak from experience because oftentimes when this gets debated, I can remember when I was in the White House around the Obama campaign, and we did Race to the Top, and we talked about teacher pay, and we talked about immigration in the context of we're a nation of immigrants, but we're also a nation of laws, and now people on the right just play back Obama clips from 2008 where he's talking about border security. So I get that. How do we know people's negative view of the Democratic Party and the Democratic Party's losing some elections, some big ones, is due primarily to specific issue positions and not a number of other factors? General perception of elitism, corruption, weakness, however you define it, right? There's a whole bunch of different potential factors in these losses.
I think all this stuff is in the mix, obviously, and to an extent it connects to people. Searchlight Institute did a really interesting series of polls about corruption. People are very concerned about corruption. They think the political establishment is very corrupt, but they asked, do you consider X, Y, and Z thing corrupt? And, it's like trading on insider stock information, definitely corrupt. But people also said it was corrupt when politicians do things to sort of curry favor with social elites that aren't what the public wants, right? So that's a very expansive view of corruption, where if you're afraid of getting canceled or something, so you're doing this, that could be corrupt in some people's eyes. You also might see that as weak. I don't think you want to be weak. I think, again, to the point of why presidential campaigns matter, moderate members of Congress are almost all people who are representing districts that Donald Trump won. I think those people are, in some ways, the Democrats' MVPs, but they are not MVPs when it comes to big partisan controversies, because that's not how you hold down a red house seat. You kind of duck those fights, and that does look weak to people in the base.
And that's here is consumer politics. This is consumerism infiltrating the integrity of politics. If you are a Democrat representing a district or a town, whatever, that Trump won, you should be reaching out to those people and explaining to them what else is wrong with the Republican Party and getting them out of that party. The party is irredeemable, okay? It's not about pleasing the public if the public are ignorant, uneducated, white trash, fascist conservatives. Get away from this idea that they deserve respect. They don't.
What they want, right? In a presidential campaign, you can do what Donald Trump did on Medicare and Social Security. You can do what President Obama did on education issues, which is you can reposition to the center on select things while also being a strong voice for your party and its side on certain kinds of key issues. But I do think that issues matter to people. It's not a coincidence that in 2012, Democrats had all these great ads lambasting Mitt Romney's Medicare plan. And then Donald Trump comes along and he's like, I'm not going to do that Medicare plan, right? Yeah. Now, 90% of the people who voted for Obama in 2012 vote for Hillary in 2016. But the people who were persuaded by those Medicare ads, now they got a Republican who's like, you know what? I'm not going to do that. So, you go around the country, right? Not that many people are swing voters. It's a small population. But I think there are people there, right, who are looking at these questions about who should play on women's sports teams. And they really do care about that issue. And it upsets them that Democrats have the position that they don't agree with. And that's a different, I mean, that was not an issue that we talked about really 10, 15 years ago. But I remember in 2008 when that campaign was happening and Obama and all Democrats everywhere said that marriage is between a man and a woman. And that's not what I believed. And I know lots of the younger people who worked on those campaigns. That's not what they believed. I don't know what the principals themselves believe privately, but I think everyone kind of understood at that point in time that it was going to be the job of someone else to like persuade the voters that our more forward-thinking progressive view was correct, and that the politicians were going to, try to get to yes with the electorate. That it was tough enough to be opposing these constitutional amendments and other kinds of things that would have completely closed the door on equality. And so some of what's happened is, I think, just a less of a pragmatic spirit. That Trump is so terrible, it makes people feel like, well, if he can get away with so much, like we should be able to get away with undisciplined behavior. But that's just like that's not really how it works. It's like if he's really terrible, we need to take this really seriously.
Pod Day of America is brought to you by Helix. Importantly, Times polls that the Democratic Party is too far left. And more people think, at least in the New York Times poll, more people think the Democratic Party is too far left than they think the Republican Party is too far right.
Not great.
Not great. Though, importantly, in all 6 of the states where they polled, the 6 Senate states that are pickup opportunities for Democrats, voters were less likely to describe the Democratic candidate as too far left than they were the Democratic Party itself. Do you attribute that to specific moderate positions taken by Mary Peltola, Josh Turek, Sherrod Brown, Roy Cooper, James Tallarico? Because, and I don't know about all of their positions on everything, but it doesn't seem like, at least, I know enough, like Sherrod's been around long enough. It doesn't seem like they have moderated on any of the issues where you might think the Democrats need to moderate on.
Well, it's a little of both, right? So Turek and Peltola have both sort of said that they want to support their state's oil and gas industries, which would be a very hot take in National Democratic Party politics. I think it's kind of a no-brainer in Alaska and Texas. And, that's good. We're just all kind of getting to a place of pragmatism and stuff like that. Roy Cooper, he's been in statewide office in North Carolina for a long, long, long time, has a distinctive relationship with the voters there. I think they see him as moderate, at least, because he's held office for a long time. There's this Republican supermajority in the legislature, so we don't really know like what it is he would have done if he was empowered. Josh Turek in Iowa, he really had a hard-fought primary. Elizabeth Warren and others were supporting his opponent. He held and represented an Obama to Trump, switching district in the state legislature there. I don't know anything about Iowa. I've never been there. I don't like to represent myself as an expert, but it did seem like it was the more moderate choice in a contested primary. Sherrod Brown is, I think, the interesting one. I mean, I'm old enough to remember in 2006 when he was like this progressive dream candidate who emerged, and like that was a different era in Ohio. Right? Like everything was very different back then. He, in Obama's first term, he really clashed with the White House over some energy stuff related to the steel industry, things like that. In Biden's term, he was much more kind of a good soldier, got along with everybody, maybe not the best idea in a state that Trump won by 6 points. So I don't know, exactly where he's going to come down there. Some of it, though, is that, when you have a specific individual candidate, they can try to communicate who they are rather than being like a caricature, right? And so that is always the power of individual candidates, particularly individual candidates who, unlike late stage Joe Biden, can like actually speak and engage with people.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, because I do think that the focus on positions and issue positions, which I do think voters care about, I would not dismiss that, but it is one of many factors, because a lot of the people you just talked about, it seems like they have an image of being more moderate, partly because of vibes that they put off, because of their bio, because of who they are, how they communicate. I mean, Roy Cooper's an interesting one too, because he ran for governor and won that race, partly the bathroom bill in North Carolina at the time. Now we're talking about trans issues around sports teams and gender affirming care, but back then it was a bathroom bill, and he was able to win in 2016.
Yeah.
It was a pretty tough year, despite being very vocal on that issue at the time. And you do wonder then, is the reason that Roy Cooper's doing so well and people think he's more moderate is it other factors aside from the actual positions he's taken?
But I think that there's a both end to this, right? So Governor Cooper was always sort of positioned himself as a champion of economic growth in North Carolina and of sort of modernization and bringing business in. There's this whole kind of New South tradition that Bill Clinton was part of, that he's part of, that Andy Beshear is part of. The bathroom bill controversy at the time that was raging, right? It was related to that. Part of the case he was making was this is going to hurt us in our convention business. It's going to hurt us in attracting financial services jobs from New York, things like that. And this is where there's issue positions, there's vibes, there's communications, and it sort of comes together, because if you can explain what you're doing in a way that connects to things that your constituents care about, that's much better than if you're kind of duck and cover all the time, right? Like, can you engage? Can you convey some kind of empathy and complexity around these issues? People don't like to be. Everybody votes for politicians who they agree with about some stuff and disagree with about other stuff. If they feel like, well, this is a political party that wants to like cancel me over our disagreements, versus that can respect the idea of differences of opinion, but thinks that all things considered, my healthcare plan is really important.
But there are
right?
limits.
Those are not.
There are limits, guys. That word tolerance comes to mind. I think tolerance has really hurt the progressive left over the years. No, if you're into automatic weapons being available for 18-year-olds, I'm not on your side, dude. I'm not going to tolerate you. I don't want anything to do with you. If you're into the war on drugs, if you're not into to raising minimum wage, if you're not into free healthcare, like, no, get the hell out of here. It's not about tolerance anymore. It's about winning.
Different issue positions, but it's a little bit more than just vibes. Like I think we saw, but before Greg Plattner exited the race under a cloud of scandal, we were putting to the test the idea that a sort of a pure vibes candidacy could sort of transform the demographic structure of the electorate. And I think the polls were saying that that wasn't working, that he was going to beat Susan Collins until scandals took him down. But this is a state that Kamala won. It's a state that Biden won. It's a state that Hillary won. He was winning based on educated people in coastal towns, kind of same old, because his issue positions were actually very, very standard, even though he had this really interesting persona. I think we both met. He was very charismatic in person, like a cool guy, then maybe not so cool. But ultimately, if you're going to persuade people who haven't been voting for you to vote for you, you've got to give them something, right? Like some reason to think that you're different.
And this is the case with so many of these races, is that there's so many different variables that it's hard to pin something down, because it's like, I realize that the left wants to believe that Graham Plattner and his race could have won him a bunch of non-college educated white voters and sort of pick that lock that Democrats have been trying to pick for the last 20 years. I never really thought that was the case, but I did think that his charisma was a big factor there. I saw you write a couple times that one of the reasons he might have been seen as not as left as the Democratic Party as a whole is because of his position on guns.
Yeah.
But then I was like, did that many people in Maine really knew? Did they all know what his position on guns was? Because he didn't talk about it a lot. It wasn't it wasn't like a big part of his campaign. And I wonder if his style and charisma may have made up for some of the in his case, both the scandals early on, and the further left issue positions like Medicare for all, abolish ICE, and his position on Israel. Like, I wonder if his persona helped with his perception.
Well, I guess part of the point I was trying to make in my 2028 piece is that the things that the establishment and the kind of more progressive people have been arguing about are actually mostly not the issues that it seems like swing voters disagree with Democrats about, right? So like on Israel, the mass public has become quite skeptical of the U.S.-Israel relationship. Obviously, that's a very fraught issue, and there's like always somebody who wants to go further, no matter what position you take. But there's like big room in the public eye for revisiting where Democrats have been on that. Medicare for all, we've been talking about for 10 years. Like polling on that is all over the map, depending on what you ask. But people have pretty progressive ideas about healthcare.
It's not over the map. Nope. Polling for Medicare for all bottomed out at 69%. Okay? Medicare for all has always been popular, always will be popular, and we should have gotten it by now. We should have gotten it 20 years ago with Obama.
Voters believe that if people get sick, they should be able to see the doctor. And so, you can kind of go places on that. At the same time, something I wrote about is kind of like racial targeting of programs is quite unpopular with white people in particular who, want programs to benefit them rather than other people, which is pretty easy to understand. Not really something the left and the establishment disagree about. Again, interestingly, Obama in 2008 on the campaign trail, made some real waves by suggesting that he wanted to revisit some of that and question, do his daughters need special advantage over low-income white kids, right? That'd be a very hot take to put forward. It was a hot take when he did it. Obviously, he had some personal qualities that gave him a little bit more space on those kind of things. But those are statements that make people think, maybe I need to give a new look to somebody who's out there. And I think you're right. Plattner didn't really talk much about the guns thing. We don't know how that would have gone as a general election, right? But, different things pop at different kinds of times. But I do think that successful politicians usually put something on the table to make you think, oh, this guy's different. Like, that's fresh. That's new. And charisma is like how you make that pop. But it still matters what the content is. Because if what we see is like, oh, that's different. That's an idea I've never heard before. And I hate it. Like, that's not good, right? Like, you don't want to get attention for terrible ideas that everyone hates.
The empathy point you made earlier, and I wonder if you read Brian Boitler's piece today, where he sort of wrote about this as well, is like sort of the need to show empathy, or Democratic politician to show empathy can kind of sort of bridge some of these divides and these disagreements between factions in the party. The Obama thing made me think. So yeah, he would go out and talk about like maybe what we really need is class-based affirmative action and not just race-based affirmative action.
You go.
And then he would also make the point that when people say, okay, well then race doesn't matter, it's all about class. He would say, well, no, I mean, I'm biracial, but when I hail a cab and the cab keeps going, I'm black to that cab.
Absolutely.
Driver, and I do wonder if it is a question of Democrats, or a lot of the Democratic candidates we've seen, not quite having the skills to explain their positioning and also explain it in a way where people who may be against the position they take can at least understand where they're coming from, and because the politician showed some empathy for their position as well as the position of the people that that politician landed on, their same beliefs.
Yeah, and I mean, I think this is this is where I think the substance of the positions and the communications methods sort of come together, right? And so, both Biden and Harris and Clinton, for all sort of different reasons, but none of them were really kind of like sit down and gab at length kind of politicians who made you feel like they could explain in sort of some level of nuance what it was they really thought about these different kinds of issues. And that hurts you, right? Because like this is a big, diverse country. You end up with two political parties, two candidates down there. You're trying to assemble a somewhat messy coalition. And there's going to have to be some like fuzzing of these issues. There's going to have to be some outreach to the middle, but you've got to get people on the left on board. I mean, look at this primary happening in Michigan, right? It's very bitter. Somebody's going to win. Somebody's going to lose. They're going to need to get the people who voted for the other person to come vote for them, which is going to mean whoever wins that is going to have to redescribe whatever it is they were saying about Israel or whatever else in a way that is at least acceptable to the other person's voters. And like, that's hard, right? I mean, that's the real art of politics. As a journalist, I observe that this occurs and that the good politicians do it. But I do feel like there has been I remember when Harris was campaigning with Liz Cheney, and there was a lot of like people from the left were like, this is terrible. Like, how can you work with Liz Cheney? And then conversely, Harris wasn't like moving toward Liz Cheney's position.
At all,
on any kind of
anything.
issues, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that wound up being a real kind of like dead zone version of like trying to seem more moderate, but not actually making anybody like her better, but raising these different kinds of questions. And it was just challenging, I think, for her to convey to people exactly what she was trying to say about this. Like, why should somebody who was more conservative than Kamala Harris vote for her anyway? Because that's clearly what that was meant to convey, right? Like that was the purpose of them being up on stage. But it's like, it's a hard argument to make. I mean, I don't have a big difficulty making the case to say like Trump, like he's corrupt, January 6th, but like also I just don't agree with him. Like he's cutting healthcare, he's doing tax cuts for the rich. Like these aren't things that I agree with. But she wanted to make a pitch to people like my father-in-law, who's like pretty conservative, but also really doesn't like Trump, you know, and I think he voted for Harris at the end of the day, and then he votes for Greg Abbott down ballot. But there's all these people out there who are conflicted, and you do have to come up with some way to build a bridge to them that also, you know, conveys to progressives that like, if Democrats win the election, progressive public policy is going to happen.
You build a bridge to them by saying you do not possess the intellectual or experiential portfolio of comprehension to understand that baby boomer conservative capitalism got us here, and we need to replace that system. So you need to replace that. The leadership towards that movement is going to be completely different than what you were used to. So you reach out to them, you build a bridge to them by telling them you had your turn, you've been in charge, now we're in charge, and it's your turn to sit down, shut up, and listen. I mean, and if they're not into that, fuck them. And use them as an example to get other people to vote. Because when I talk like that to baby boomer conservatives, other people get excited. They're like, yeah, this is the problem. It's not just the conservative politicians, it's the conservative voters too.
So you're running the presidential campaign as your dream Democrat who's willing to emphasize moderation.
Yeah.
What moderate stances are you telling them to emphasize where the Democratic Party's position is most out of step with even its own voters on high salience issues, right? Which are issues voters rate as most important to them, or just issues that are going to come up in the campaign. I mean, we just talked about sort of affirmative action. The Supreme Court has now ruled on using race as a factor in college admissions. Doesn't seem like that is going to be a hot button issue in 2028. And so you could argue that just purely on a political level, moderating on that in a sort of a loud way.
Probably out, yeah.
And also can feel a little inauthentic and opportunistic.
Absolutely.
You know, so what do you think are the big ones?
So, I think there's like a few different buckets here. But immigration is a big one, right? Because there's a big backlash against what ICE has been doing. All Democrats are going to give voice to that, et cetera, et cetera. But this continues to be one of Donald Trump's strong issue areas. And you see that in polling of even Democrats, there's real concern about reopening sort of the gates to people seeking asylum. Now, this is not where like I am at personally. I'm like quite left on immigration, but I can see the numbers here, right?
Yeah.
And you need to convey to people both that there's going to be a meaningful recalibration from what Trump is doing, but also that like we have heard what people were saying during the Biden administration and are not going to rerun that experience. I think that.
So this is something that I have a little bit of an issue with the DSA National on, is we need a comprehensive alternative to the immigration system that isn't open borders or just doesn't sound or look like open borders. Open borders isn't like even a real thing. It's just how do we distribute immigrants as they come in through our southern border? And the DSA should be leading the way on that with specific suggestions, but they're not.
That's like a big one. I think some of these trans issues are not that salient with the public, but they get brought up a lot by Republicans. You have to be prepared to answer questions about them. And I think you have to be prepared to go into some level of nuance because you want to convey like real empathy, real support for people's rights, but also to understand I think that like there is a set of sex segregated spaces where most Americans want, biology is defined by chromosomes to be the controlling factor there. I think you have to at least throw a bone to the median voter on this kind of topic when you're addressing it. And then I think there's this set of things. Education is, I think, the most prominent of them. But can you show people that Democrats understand that like voters support the social safety net, voters support public services, voters support taxing the wealthy, but also voters like want to see change and reform in the state, in the government. That when Doge was first rolled out, people were really excited about it, right? And it all went to shit. But the idea of like, I am willing to take on the stakeholders inside the bureaucracy and do something good, like that means a lot to people in terms of like, what are their doubts about Democratic Party governance? When people live in the Midwest and they think about California or New York, right? They think maybe a nice place to live if you're like incredibly wealthy, but they don't think what they've really got there is like an incredible balance of taxes and quality public services, right? It's like the weather is amazing in California. The culture and nightlife in New York is fantastic. But people look at those higher taxes and they're like, well, what are you getting for that money, right? And people who live in those states, like you're in California, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's like California's amazing, but none of the Californians are like the thing that is amazing about California is that the high levels of taxes that I pay is like really paying off in my day-to-day life, right? And like we know that between ourselves. And that is something that Bill Clinton and Barack Obama, I think, both tried to give voice to, even as they tried to give healthcare, EITC, other things to help the needy.
Pod Save America is brought to you by Our Place. Our Place makes beautiful, high-performance kitchenware designed.
There are other sources of tax revenue that are not individual income taxes, guys, like capital gains. And then stay tuned for my channel for the Dieter Debt Solution, which will really take on wealth and income inequality in a real way.
The challenge we're landing on here is that nuance and thoughtful explanations don't. First of all, people aren't as good at giving them,
Sure.
and so there's a skill level with politicians that we talked about, and even if you are skilled, there's just the ability to get that message out, right? Mm-hmm. And so people see ICE abuses, and you've got people even like Bill Kristol now. Every time there's an ICE story, is tweeting abolish ICE, right? And I get it because you feel this absolute fury and frustration for what they're doing. And look, I could make an argument that yes, ICE is a relatively new organization, and that we could put immigration enforcement back at some parts of it DHS and DOJ, and we could do the bureaucratic part and everything. And I'm someone who's comfortable saying yes, we still need immigration enforcement, obviously. But if you just say abolish ICE, of course, abolish immigration and custom enforcement makes a lot of people think, oh well, then you don't want immigration enforcement anymore. When the reality is like, if I was a Democratic president, I'd go and I was heading into office after this. Yeah, I would fire most of the people in ICE because I think they've hired a bunch of unqualified psychopaths. I would still want immigration enforcement somehow, but then it takes a while to explain all of that, And,
Absolutely.
And I just wonder how that plays out in a Democratic presidential
Amnesty
primary.
for people who are already here.
On the one hand, yes, nuance is hard. On the other hand, I don't think it's actually that hard to say. We need to totally revamp how ICE works, or even abolish it, whatever. But we need a secure border. James Talarico had this line, and he's like, we've got to have like a door with a beautiful welcome mat and also a lock, right? And that's like a good, metaphor, right? So he's smart, but it's not impossible to come up with these kind of formulas. But I actually think is a little bit harder, for people who are down ballot, and maybe even for presidential candidates, is navigating the kind of interest group minefield, where there's a lot of stakeholders who have very specific things that they want you to say. And politicians get these kind of memos from their staffs. They're like, don't say this, do say that, don't say this, do say that, right? And they're really nervous, right? They're trying to navigate in this really precise way. Like, I don't want to lose this endorsement. I don't want to, get scored down on something else like this. And it makes it hard for them to talk like people. Like, we all know Democrats in our lives who are much more nuanced, I think, than the members of Congress who we see on our televisions. And it's because they're not under the same kind of pressure and the same kind of scrutiny to sort of talk in like a relaxed, somewhat normal way about things. But it takes courage. I mean, this is why, again, I look to presidential campaigns more to change things, because the reality facing anyone who wants to run for president is you're probably going to lose, right? Like it's hard. It's hard to win. And I think a lot of the best presidential candidates are people who started off as real underdogs, right? I mean, again, that's something that Trump and Obama have in common, right? It took a certain amount of courage to even launch those campaigns and to work on them and to do it. The last three times Democrats have kind of had this sort of like overdog nominee who was like handed down by the weight of the past. And that's not great, because people who are taking that path, just their incentive is toward being cautious all the time. Yes. So then you come across as a really cautious, really calculating person, rather than somebody who was like, I'm going to take my shot, and I'm going to speak from the heart. And no politician is ever like truly authentic, truly speaking from the heart. But there is a difference between someone who's like, I'm going to go for it, and someone who's like, well, this is coming my way, so I'm going to not fuck it up.
At one point, you write that.
And that whole authenticity thing can be solved by people who have a chip on their shoulder with something to prove. Like Abdul Al-Sayed in Michigan is a proven winner. Like, the guy has an MD and was valedictorian of his class, 2007 class, undergraduates at Michigan. I mean, the guy's brilliant. And I think he could be authentic. What's to prevent him from calling out white trash fascism for what it is? Oh, yeah, that's right, because he's not white, right? Now we're getting into the mechanics of how to execute my agenda, which is a series of unapologetic counterattacks along the lines of coining the acronym WTF. Doesn't stand for what you think it does anymore. It stands for white trash fascism. Modern day slavery that we often call human trafficking thrives when nation states strip us of our freedom of movement to enforce Epstein class interests through border control. Good observation, Latino Mafuni. Back to this crap.
Center-left candidate who is, quote, charismatic and skilled at contemporary social media can talk above the groups directly to voters. Totally agree. But you mentioned Obama is sort of coming up as an underdog and getting attention, and everyone else has sort of been handed down. Like, how many Democratic politicians can you name in the last decade who've been able to command national attention with a message of disciplined moderation?
Well, no, I mean, most of the people who've come up and have commanded attention have been very left-wing, and I think that's a big part of the reason why the whole discourse keeps getting sort of dragged to the left.
Because people are sick of neoliberal centrism. That's why they're getting the attention, because people are sick of neoliberal centrism.
More left-wing, and particularly within the Democratic Party. So you have your AOCs, you have your Mamdanis, and these are the people who've shown real flair for communication skills. I think you have also seen from both of them, impulses toward AOC had this whole bit about like how we need to deregulate sunscreen, essentially, right? And Mamdani has some like small business kind of thing and stuff that he's doing that impresses people. So this stuff can work for different kinds of politicians with different kinds of ethoses. Also, branding, I think actually is not what matters most. I mean, Obama in 2008, I think, was understood as the progressive sort of choice in that primarily because of Iraq.
Even though Obama never called himself a progressive, he's always been a liberal. Obama is a capitalist, a neoliberal capitalist. Never forget that.
Which was really, really important to people at that time. So you look back and you say, well, he was actually the one who was like taking on teachers unions. He was the one who actually had more support from sort of like Wall Street and finance. He was the preferred candidate of a lot of the red state members of Congress at that time. He tacked to the center on affirmative action, all these other kinds of things. But at the time, like, progressives really liked him because he was the one who said, like, this war is really fucked up. And, that is the advantage of taking a position that is vindicated by time.
Progressives liked Obama in 2008 because he was left of Hillary Clinton. He was a minority. He was an outsider. He was anti-establishment. And he looked a lot further left than Hillary Clinton. Okay? Come on, guys. We got to get rid of public memory and get into history. And as this is someone who studied public memory. And the better off... The closer that public memory and history are the same thing, the better off we are as a society. Because this whole idea that the Clintons and the Obamas really helped America has got to go for things are going to get better. We are in the fight of our lives.
It's like always good to have like good judgment on the substance of questions. And so I think anyone, including people who are sort of understood today to be progressive, could also move to the center on these kind of issues that we've been talking about. Because when I talk to really left-wing people about like what are they fired up about, it's like not actually the things that the public has the biggest doubts for Democrats about. I think if you want to be a Medicare for all candidate, there's like real problems of program design that you sort of need to confront, but it's not a political problem in the way that the sense that you want to open the borders is. Abolish ICE, maybe not a slogan I would advise people to go with.
What?
But if you can convey the idea that
Dude,
abolishing ICE doesn't mean
man.
reopening.
Like, are you serious? Abolish ICE is like the sexiest. Abolish ICE is up there with abolish APAC. No, it's war. Again, this soft fucking guy. This soft fucking guy who's never won anything in his life other than an argument. We're sitting here listening to this crap and acting as if it's legitimate analysis. We are at war. And there's not one mention of baby boomer sociopathy. None of this cultural resentment takes place along generational lines. And if things are going to get better, it needs to. We need to identify the problem, and the problem is baby boomer conservative capitalism. Latino Mafune, MVP of the day. Obama loved dressing himself in radical aesthetics in his tenure as a senator. He knew appearing progressive was beneficial to him because liberalism lacks swagger in the public eye. Yeah, well, liberalism is dead. Bill Clinton killed liberalism. There's only neoliberal and progressive. All right, back to it.
millions of new asylum seekers, like that could be totally fine. Maybe it's easier actually to moderate on aspects of immigration if you have this left-wing slogan rather than if you're coming at it backwards. Like I'm not totally sure, how that needle needs to be threaded ultimately. I just think it's that you have to give voters some level of reassurance about their biggest doubts about Democrats, especially if you're going to say we're going to have a whole new approach to Israel. We're going to take on the vested interests in the healthcare system. Like you're not going to pull that off while also alienating 60% of the population around cultural issues, right? Like if you want to say we're going to like have this populist anchor, then I think you just have to follow the logic of that in like a compelling way and say, look, if you can agree with me that healthcare should be a right rather than a privilege, like I want you on my team. Like I'm not going to take away your plastic straw, right? Like because
FDR's second Bill of Rights, guys: healthcare, housing, education, Social Security, protection from farmers, protection from unfair competition. I mean, it's a starting point, guys. It's the foundation. It's not everything, but it's most of it.
we're focused on the healthcare thing versus this sort of laundry list politics where it's like, I got this for the healthcare, I got this for the childcare, I've got this on the plastic straws, I've got this on the immigration, I got this on the asylum, this on criminal justice. Like that's a hard way to do politics.
I am intrigued by your advice on candidates offering policy plans, which is don't do that.
Less.
Less, right? So you're asked, how do you get to universal health care? And you say, it depends on the composition of Congress. What are you going to do about the deficit? We need to tax rich people and cut wasteful spending, but then not a lot more detail. I mean, those answers certainly have the virtue of being true, right? Like, of course, this all depends on Congress and all kinds of other circumstances that you can't predict in the heat of a campaign. In a campaign, as the primary goes on with the imaginary candidate we're talking about here, is it possible to dodge questions and attacks from your opponents about having no plans? And it does seem like that was part of, Kamala Harris's vagueness was part of sort of the negative coverage she received.
Yeah, so one thing is, with all this plan stuff, I'm trying to hold myself accountable a little bit because I was part of a wave of young at the time journalists who were really like, we got to see plans from these presidential candidates. And in retrospect, it's like, I wonder why we were so demanding of that, because that's not how the government works, right? And we all know that. And so this is there was this faux sophistication coming from me and from some of my colleagues, but I mean, specifically from me as well, to be demanding all this detail from people. And I think that if you can give real answers that make sense, that both journalists and voters will understand, actually, that the micro details of tax policy are written by Congress and that the directionality of tax policy is like a numbers game, right? Like if we have a teeny tiny majority, it's going to be hard to do very much. But if we have a big majority, we'll do a lot. And you try to say what kinds of things you want to do. With Harris, right? I mean, she was in this weird position where she was the vice president for an incumbent administration. She was saying, I remember the first time when she was doing a little rally and she said, we're not going back. And I was like, yeah, I love that line, right? Because people really wanted both change, but also not Donald Trump.
Right.
And so she seemed to convey that. But then she got the question, well, in what way is this change, but not Donald Trump? And she didn't have a great answer. The great thing about being a Democrat running when a Republican is president is that you don't have that same complicated question.
Right.
Right. It's like change that's not Donald Trump is just elect a Democrat. Right. And then people do want to know something like, what does that mean? What are you going to do? How are you going to govern differently? And I'm not saying that you should dodge that question. I mean, again, implicit in all of this is that rich people's taxes will go up. We're going to spend more money on subsidizing people's healthcare. We're going to, however we characterize what we're doing with ICE, it's like fewer people are going to be getting arrested in the interior of American cities. And then hopefully we can also say, but there's going to be a very secure border. We're going to keep fighting crime. We're going to make crime even lower than it is now, something like that. But do we really need to have this 17-point plan like we had in the 2020 primary? Again, thinking about 2008, right? There were all these articles written about different candidates' healthcare plans, and Obama's plan didn't have a mandate. Right. And then he won the primary, and then he won the election, and then Congress did want to do the mandate, so the mandate happened. But then in the rule writing at HHS, it got watered down a little bit. Then there was unrelated implementation problems. But then actually it was going pretty well, and people liked Obamacare, but then the mandate got repealed, and then that maybe didn't. It's so tedious. And in retrospect, it sure must have been a huge pain in your ass, and it was in mine. Why do we spend so much time talking about this?
The challenge here is a reason that these policy plans are developed in the context of a primary is to be used as a political cudgel against your opponents because you're running in a primary, and the truth is most of you have the same general position on most of the same issues, and you want to differentiate yourself from the other primary candidates, and so you put out...
All right, this is a good point here. This has to do with ethos, personal, internal credibility for the candidate, and whether or not you believe that they're going to deliver. That's what I think 2028 search for the next president should be about. Who is going to deliver big structural change?
A plan that is bolder and more ambitious, which is either it's more expensive or probably harder to achieve than the other candidates, so that you can get on the debate stage and brag about that. And then, I think it happened in an even more annoying way than the mandate in 2020, when I don't know how many of those debates ended
God.
up being just a conversation, not even a conversation, just a debate about Medicare for All and whose Medicare for All plan was the best, when then Joe Biden won and what did he like barely expanded anything?
Yeah, but I mean,
Like, gave some subsidies and that was about it.
That
Yeah.
is one where I think it is important to remind people
funny.
that like Joe Biden won that primary, right? After that huge shit show, that actually his message of like, I'm just going to beat Donald Trump.
No. Joe Biden won that primary because Barack Obama and Jim Clyburn interfered. Okay? Go check the timeline, guys, on 2020 primaries, because that was some bullshit and another reason to not dislike Obama.
Was like pretty compelling, actually, to Democratic primary voters. And he is not the single most like silver-tongued person in the universe, certainly not a master of vertical video or whatever else it is. So I do think that there's like ways for younger politicians to tap into some of what worked for him there, right? In terms of like keeping the focus on like, what do Democrats really care about? And it's beating Trump. It's not just beating Trump, right? I think Democrats care a lot about healthcare. And I think Democrats are quite exercised about some of the cruelty of these immigration enforcement actions. And if you can hit those three buttons in some kind of way and convince people that you're going to take action on those issues, like you could be, I think, conceivably pretty flexible on some other things if people believed that it was in pursuit of accomplishing these important goals.
The Biden thing is interesting, though, because I don't see a lot of evidence that Biden ended up winning that primary because he staked out more moderate positions than the rest of the field. In many ways, he sort of chased them on some of these issues. He I think half raised his hand on decriminalizing the border on that one. And I think that what helped him is he had universal name ID. He was Barack Obama's vice president. And so he sort of had a bit of an Obama halo. And then there was no one else left by the time it was just he and Bernie, right? And
And he did really
Jimmy.
well in the head-to-head matchup polling
Yes.
against Trump, right? I mean, that, Democrats these days, read the New York Times when Nate Cohn tells them that like Elizabeth Warren is really unpopular and people like Joe Biden, like that made a big difference.
It
in the
did.
primary.
Yeah, he just goes back to the challenge I keep thinking about is like Joe Biden, Hillary Clinton, Kamala Harris, because she was just, installed last minute. These are all people that their name ID came from virtue of them being political dynasties or someone else's vice president and the incentives to become nationally known and get attention, I feel like point towards language that is bolder, more ambitious, geared towards conflict, sometimes hyperbolic. And I'm trying to picture the candidate who practices discipline moderation, who sort of breaks out in these, like, I think about like an Andy Bashir, right? Like amazing track record, electoral record in Kentucky, and still like a pretty mainstream Democrat, not like super conservative, but like I'm trying to picture Andy Bashir, and I've seen him give some interviews. I've interviewed him myself,
Jimmy.
like
I
really
like you,
breaking
man.
out
Keep
in
it
a crowded
going,
primary with a message that's going to capture people. And that's I feel like we have a lot of center-left candidates who may be electorally viable, but are not very good at getting attention. And then we have a lot of progressive candidates who are very good at getting attention and may not be electorally viable in swing states,
So some of this, like, yes, right. Part of the deal with someone like Governor Bashir is that he's very disciplined, which I think is good
He's a
for him
robot.
winning elections in Kentucky, but it
Fucking
also
robot.
denudes
Just like
him of a
John
certain amount of
Ossoff
pizzazz,
is a fucking
right, that could
robot.
potentially be out there. Like one of the things that I think was interesting about Plattner wasn't just like the positions that he took, but that he seemed very like anything might happen in this interview.
It's a cold, Jimmy. Well
and that
put.
kind of kinetic energy is unusual in experienced politicians because the way you kind of get to be almost a presidential contender is usually by being like quite controlled, and like calm, and you climb the state party ladder and you make the right kind of people like you, and then suddenly you find yourself in a crowded presidential primary field, and like the challenge is to break
Okay,
through.
so this
And it's, like, a
guy's
totally
all
different
this
dynamic.
guy's analysis is based on really traditional understandings of American politics. This guy does not seem to understand that Trump getting elected in 2016 represents a paradigm shift for one of the two major parties to be unapologetically fascistic. Okay? This is fascism we're up against. I don't know if we've heard that word this entire time, but that's what it is. So the paradigm has shifted. The rules have changed. People want aggressive, unapologetic, confrontational rhetoric. Tell the MAGA trash to shut up, sit down, get out of the way so we can clean up the mess that they made. The other options are move to another country or use your imagination for that third option, but it would be a permanent option. Yeah, anyway, back
right.
to here.
And I think somebody like Ruben Gallego, who has, through many twists and turns in his career, found himself as kind of like a moderate swing state senator.
Jimmy, chill, man. I'm an anti-establishment progressive Democrat. I'm a member of the Democratic Socialists of America. And yeah, I'm telling you that the GOP is a fascist institution and we need to wage war on it. But first, we need to get control of the institution that we need to control in order to wage war on it and win, and that's the Democratic Party. So, yeah, I don't know what your issue is with my analysis. If you get more specific, that could be helpful. I think, you got some energy here, so it'd be good for the show. But you got to get specific, man. I'm not following you. You're telling me to fuck off because I want a one-party system. It's like, I don't want a one-party system. I actually want a five-party system with ranked choice voting. That would be ideal. But in order to get there, we have to crush the GOP first.
But just a couple of years ago was like the progressive challenger to Kristen Sinema. And before that was like the young guy in the state legislature who was trying to muscle Ed Pastor out of a House seat. Right. And he has a little bit more of the
No, it's not either of those things, man. It's both of them, but not exclusive. It's like we're learning lessons from all of them, right? Like Hitler did to the Jews what Trump is doing to the immigrants. And that culture, though, is the same culture that we fought against in the Civil War, we fought against during civil rights in the 1950s and 60s, and are still fighting against today. So, you got to take it head on. Like, the paradigm shift, the word is out, okay? And the left just needs to be really realistic about who they choose for fighters. Because I'm in California, Javier Becerra, okay, going to be the next governor of California, not the answer. That's identity politics, hard at work protecting capitalism right there. It's disgusting. It's disgusting the way the establishment the neoliberal establishment uses identity politics to protect neoliberal capitalism. It's garbage. What we need, a multi-party system with ranked choice voting that excludes parties and candidates that don't oppose democracy. Yeah. What is this? The juice box has been exposed? No going back. I agree, man. Yeah, and that's the beautiful thing about the ugly part of social media, that, this ugliness has been realized. We see the problem now. We didn't see it in previous generations. You started World War III. You're talking about MAGA started World War III, I hope.
looseness that kind of gets you attention, but is unusual in all kinds of politicians. We're seeing it more with left-wing politicians because they've been challenging incumbents, right? Only like a slightly crazy person runs against an entrenched House incumbent. Most of the people who do that lose, but a couple of them win. And then you're AOC, right? Because you took on this sort of suicide run primary. You don't see as many people like that in the moderate lane, but I think it's possible, right? Because it's about trying to be interesting and like trying to break through. And it is also about having the right issue positions. I mean, so many people who care about electoral pragmatism, I think, really like Josh Shapiro, right? Because he's doing incredibly well in the critical swing state. And I think that's really important. It's also true that, when he like speaks from the heart in a way that is moderate and compelling and makes you think like, okay, like this guy's for real, he tends to be talking about the Israel issue in a way that like, it's just public opinion is not on his side, and like that's a tough one. Like you can't win by being moderate on something where everything's going the other way. Now that being said, like he has done some stuff in the state that is heterodox on energy. He's done stuff in the state that is heterodox on education. I think maybe if he talked more about those things, that delivers the same kind of electoral pragmatism, but also actually connects more with things that Democrats themselves have mixed feelings about. About like how are these systems operating? Are we shaking them up? Are we governing well in our blue states? These kinds of things. But there's no getting around the fact that politics is hard.
Pods of America is brought to you by Sundays. Is your dog a picky eater?
Oh, Jesus Christ.
Look at how he's navigated the coalitions and approval rating, all that kind of stuff. And then it's not just like, I don't want to say it's a lack of charisma, but it's what is the story that you're telling about why you're running and why you're different from everyone else? And is that story cohesive and compelling versus
really? Okay, I don't know who you are, man, but welcome to the party. Thank you for posting because the engagement helps. But what are you talking about, dude? There's no difference between North Korea and America. Come on, man. Because everybody watches movies from North Korea. Where was the World Cup just hosted? You fucking kidding me, dude? What kind of ass? You're talking about our government as the same? Like it's like a dictatorship? If you want to say America is headed in that direction, then that might be insightful. But if you don't think there's a difference, then you're just ignorant. You just said you're not American, so you don't really know what you're talking about. But thanks for commenting. Thanks for being here.
Issues where you can say, see, this is why I'm different than the National Democratic Party and a little more moderate, and the thing that you hate about the National Democratic Party is not the thing that you are going to hate about me, which can, again, really risk sounding like you read a polling memo.
Yeah, although it also depends what people in our line of work decide that we are interested in, right? Like a very large share of media professionals live in New York City. And they, personally, are very interested in left-wing reformist politics in New York City, where they live. And so things that happen in that vein get a lot of coverage. I don't think it's not like wrong for people to be very passionate about politics in the city that they live in. I wish more people actually cared about the politics of the city that they live in, but it's distortionary in terms of like our understanding of national politics and like what's it all about, right? And something that, I try to do, that I think everybody has to try to do, is exercise some discipline and responsibility for ourselves, that the most important races coming up in November
Christ, are Jimmy, you're a fucking libertarian, dude. Dude, libertarians, man, I have no respect for you, Jimmy. Sorry, man, but this is globalism, dude. We live in a global economy, and you need a big, functional government to protect you from the atrocities of global capitalism. Yeah, actually, but he's actually exposed the Republican Party for what it is. I know the Republican Party better than you, most likely. The underbelly, the MAGA dark underbelly of the Republican Party has always been there. It's just Trump came along and exposed it. But dude, you get away from libertarianism, man. You gotta get off of that shit. What are you smoking? Latino Mafuna MVP of the day. Can you imagine how bad things would have become if post-war Germany handled Third Reich supporters with kid gloves? We need to be socially and legally harder on Fourth Reich supporters. Yeah, that's true. Standing next to Michelle.
Ohio, they're in Iowa, they're in Texas, Alaska, North Carolina. I have some personal connection to Texas through my wife's family. I have some personal connection to Maine, where I am physically present right now. I don't have any connection to Iowa and Ohio, but like I care a lot about the future of the country. So it's incumbent on me to like learn to care about these states, right? Rob Sand is clearly doing something in Iowa that is compelling to people who used to vote for Democrats and stopped voting for Democrats, and they like Rob Sand. And so I'm trying to get it, because he's pretty charismatic. He's an interesting guy.
Yeah,
it conveys that there's something different about him, but it's not targeted at me. And like that's why he's running in Iowa. Like that's what's good about it.
I will say, you're right that everyone needs to take responsibility for in the media and the professional class, like for what they emphasize and what they talk about. I will speak as someone who runs a media company who like we try to have everyone on.
Yeah.
And a lot of this is the attention that the person ends up commanding with audiences, right? Like we've talked to Mamdani a bunch of times, very popular, right? Not just with our audience, but like those clips travel beyond our audience, right? And we will have, Kate Connolly, who's in a much more important to the future of the country district to win when she's in town. And who knows, maybe it'll also be an incredibly viral clip. But our experience has been a lot of these candidates were in really important races that we end up talking to. Like it doesn't go anywhere because people are like, well, I don't really want to. I'm not as excited about that.
Oh, absolutely.
And that's not going to stop us from doing it. We'll keep doing it. But eventually you want, and especially you want this as a candidate on a campaign, you want your message to reach the low information voters. And unfortunately, the stuff that gets to the low information voters, to people who don't pay as close attention to all this, has to be stuff that goes viral, and that's the trick.
And this is, a huge frustration that I have with a lot of the more moderate Democrats is that they don't even want to try a lot of the time, right? That their attitude is, look, nationalizing things is bad for me. I do better if there's kind of less of a giant media glare on me. What I want to do is be well enough known among super high attention people that I can raise money.
Yep.
And then I want to talk to my local
Jimmy.
television station about my local issues.
Right.
And I get
That's what we're
why
trying to
people
do
come
with
to
the
that
DSA,
conclusion.
my
And
man.
I think it's the
Go to a
advice that they're
DSA
getting
meeting.
from the DCCC, from the DSCC. And it works within the kind of four walls of what it's designed to achieve. But then all these same people also come around to me and they're like, oh my God, I'm so frustrated. People think the only Democrats in the country are AOC and Mamdani. And it's like, well, because they do the interviews, right? And like, they'll go on your show, they'll go on Fox, and some of it is like, you can be more devil may care in a safe district.
Right.
And it's a little bit of a loaded playing field, but also, life's not fair as they tell us not to tell our 11-year-old that. You're not supposed to raise kids with that message anymore. But like, I think it's an important point fundamentally. It's like, it is harder to be in a swing district.
Yep.
It just is. The playing field is loaded against you, but like, you've got to try, right? You've got to try to be interesting. You've got to try to say, look, if you look at Vicente Gonzalez and Marie Guzman Perez and Don Davis and Kate Connolly and Tom Suozzi, that there actually is something that we all have in common. We're not all just like local people who are focused on our issues here, right? That like because they actually like they hang out together in DC. They have common staff, common consultants, common fundraisers. Like there's a group of moderate Democrats, but they need to give some voice to like, what do we think? Who are we? Why are we the good people? And I give incredible credit to Bernie Sanders, who has been tireless about trying to promote politicians who he likes. And I hear so many other Democrats, and they're mad that Bernie is promoting these people and that the people who they like aren't getting promoted. But it's like, well, who's going to promote them other than you?
Yeah, that's what actually bothers me a lot is that they they look at the insurgent candidates on the left and sort of the progressive outsiders with like umbrage. It's basically that's like the main feeling, like, how dare you? And my candidate works really hard and has been just doing, this is sort of like the Haley Stevens stuff has gotten better. I think the argument that people are making for her, but originally it was like, well, she's been there just working hard, and give her credit for being there and working hard. And it's like, okay, I'm sure that's true if you know her, but like voters don't know that. And so they're going to need a different kind of story there.
Well, and also I know so many Democrats who want her to win this primary, but who don't want to fly to Michigan and campaign with her because it'll be embarrassing if they stand with her and she loses. But it'll be embarrassing to Bernie if Abdul loses. And like he has he's doing the work, right?
Yeah.
And there's no alternative to that in politics. And that's like part of my message to the more moderate Democrats out there is like, don't just give up hope, but also don't just assume that we can keep endlessly staving off the left and pulling more rabbits out of the hat. Like, somebody's got to run a campaign. Somebody's got to make the case. You've got to actually like articulate some daring positions on the issues. And if people yell at you, you have to explain why they're wrong. And like, you got to go on Crooked, and you probably got to go on Hassan Piker, and do some interviews with people who don't agree with you and stand your ground. And that's because that's how it's always been. There's no like magic trick.
Look, I know people say it's not the issue that lost her the election, but the ad that Kamala Harris dealt with about gender-affirming care for undocumented immigrant prisoners. And the campaign was like, oh, we tested all the responses, and the responses didn't do anything, and so we decided like not to talk about it at all. And I don't think that may be true in terms of testing the ads, but I think the candidate has to be able to tell a story about why they supported that, why they've changed their mind, if they have changed their mind, that is acceptable to voters, right? Like, I don't think ducking these issues or just trying to hide from them is not an effective strategy on a presidential campaign level. Like I remember Jonathan Martin wrote a piece a while back, was like, Democrats aren't focusing at all on maybe some of the most important Senate races, like they don't get national attention, like Roy Cooper, and I was like, well, Roy Cooper probably doesn't want a lot of attention on his race because he has enough money. He has raised quite a bit of money. He's ahead. And so what does Roy Cooper care if we're all talking about Roy Cooper's race? He probably doesn't, probably rather us not. But you can't do that in a presidential primary. And the challenge is you're gonna get a bunch of moderates in the presidential primary that don't know how to sort of make that argument and get that level of attention. The one person I've been thinking about this whole time, and I thought about when I read your piece for the first time, is Rahm. Like, Rahm will be this person, right?
Yeah, I mean, Rahm is, I think, doing the right stuff. He is getting attention to himself, people know his name, etc. If I could...
Whoa. Are they about to go positive here with Rahm Emanuel? Because that guy set this country back quite a bit.
Your piece for the first time is Rahm. Like, Rahm will be this person, right?
Yeah, I mean, Rahm is, I think, doing the right stuff. He is getting attention to himself, people know his name, etc. If I could puppet master everything, I would say, look, is like a retread from the Obama White House, from the Clinton White House, who was ambassador to Japan, who, if he does gain some traction in the primary, we're going to be relitigating Lachlan McDonald. Like, that's not, like, I would love for Rahm to take a step back and to mentor somebody else.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yes. Or just stay the fuck out of it, because he's a neoliberal.
And new
Go
voices.
away.
And like, everybody can see that, right? And this is part of why I'm excited about Josh Turek and James Talmuka. It's like, these are younger politicians. They are not part of the old kind of mess. I think they are kind of media savvy and know stuff. And they're not from the left wing of the party. They're just also not handed down by the establishment, right? And like, this can be...
Hey, Jimmy, check out my essays, man. I think you'll enjoy my essays. The live stuff is interesting, but my essays really lay out my perspective. And I think if you come in with an open mind, you might find my reasoning pretty orderly and convincing. So check it out, dude. I've converted many libertarians to socialism.
Done. But to an extent, some of the people, the Rahm Emanuels of the world, need to make room for other people and promote them or help them, rather than saying, look, the same cohort that was telling you in 2016, like, don't listen to Bernie, we know how to win, and then they didn't win. And now we're 10 years into that, and it's not a healthy dynamic.
But, bro, we're trying to fight against the billionaires. We are the anti-billionaire movement, man. Jump in. You say you don't agree with it. Maybe it's because you don't know it. Maybe you're ignorant. Have you thought of that? Everybody's at least a little bit ignorant on everything. So maybe you should give my essays a chance, dude. Maybe you could learn something from someone who's different from you. Wouldn't that be some shit?
Last question on this. So who do you like in 28 as a potential candidate who could carry this message?
Sure. What I tell people is, like, we know the universe of statewide elected officials in the critical swing states, right? It's Kelly and Gallego in Arizona. It's Whitmer in Michigan. It's Shapiro in Pennsylvania. There's somebody like Tony Evers is too old. Katie Hobbs seems like, I kind of like her, but it seems like she totally refuses to do press of any kind. Yeah. Like someone who's not going to run. John Fetterman is like not going to be a leading contender, I think we could say. But like, we know this universe of candidates. And
I don't know what you're talking about, but yeah, FDR is the foundation for modern day progressivism and next generation socialism. So, yeah, you got to check it out, man. Give it a chance. Let's finish this off.
And the question is, which of them is going to try to go beyond, like you were saying, right? They're going to stand up and they're going to be like, I know how to win in the swing states. You should vote for me. This is the most practical thing to do. I kind of agree with that. It's also just not that compelling, right? And so who's going to say, I know how to win in the swing states. And the way I did it is that I said, and then you got to say the thing.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like you have to actually go say something. And something that I have noticed is that a lot of these people, depending on what audience they're talking to, they sometimes want to undersell the amount of ideological heterodoxy that they've displayed in their campaigns. Because the easiest way to raise money if you're running for re-election in Kentucky is to kind of tell like liberal donors in coastal cities, like, I'm a magician. You know, I just like won in Kentucky because I've got a cool accent. But like Andy Beshear rejected a Sierra Club endorsement. And he got the United Mine Workers, who have stopped endorsing Democrats in national politics, to endorse him. And that's because like he has a position on the use of coal that like I don't really agree with, but that people in Kentucky do agree with. And that's the truth about how Andy Beshear wins votes in Kentucky that other people don't have. I don't think you could sell that.
Hey, man, if you're not MAGA, I'm willing to talk to you. As long as you're not MAGA or any kind of, if you're a conservative, we can talk, but I'm just going to bitch you out. But, you know, you libertarians, man, open up that mind and modernize your views according to global economy, because we live in a global economy. Maybe it's not the way it should be, but it's the way it is. And we have to adapt or we'll be eliminated. So that's all I'm saying is let's get practical with the left-wing policy proposals.
To a national Democratic primary electorate, because it's like Kentucky is too right-wing, right? It's too far. But there's stuff you can say in the Midwest or in Arizona or in Georgia, but like you got to give people the real talk about like, what did you say, Raphael Warnock? What did you say, Don Ossoff, to the local audiences in Georgia, and say it to a national audience? And a lot of the time, you know, you'll find with these people, it's border security, it's some kind of political reform, and it is some effort to indicate that you're not like woke, like whatever it is exactly that means to people. But I think something like, you know, you are not going to be so obsessed with identity politics that you can't just like help everybody on their own terms, right? And that's the message Obama used. It's the message Bill Clinton used. I think we kind of like know what the like unifying, this is a diverse country, but we're all in it together. I mean, you're, you know, a brilliant speechwriter. Like, you know how to do these things, but only certain people can sell it because politics is hard.
That's true.
Well, hope we find one soon. Matt Iglesias, thank you so much for joining Pod Save America. This was a great conversation.
Thank you.
Thanks to Matt Iglesias for coming on.
And he doesn't really get into specifics about 2028 because he's an asshole. Yeah, so thank you guys for watching. That was a long session. We covered David Pakman with Gavin Newsom, and then John Favreau interviewing Iglesias about 2028 contenders. That wasn't really that insightful. It's more neoliberal rationalization. Where are the specifics? Where are the policy proposals? Where are the problems and solutions? And where are the people who are going to deliver? And that was probably the only bit of analysis that I really agreed with, which is that, you know, people can promise you a lot, but you got to vote for the person who you think is going to deliver. So with that final comment on rhetorical ethos, I would love to continue this conversation with most of you next time tomorrow night. I will be back on the stream at 6:30 or 7 Pacific time with Stat Pat Stateless Patriot for Left Coast Live. See you then. Thanks a lot, Jimmy Myers, and thank you, Latina Mafune, for joining.